Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm grateful to the Shadow Foreign Secretary for the constructive tones of her question. And let me turn to the important questions of consular access that she raised at the outset. To be clear to the House and to all members, honourable and right honourable, who have constituents involved, we are seeking from the Israeli authorities both consular access to our nationals, as you would expect, and assurances of their good treatment. We understand that British nationals are expected to be deported back to the UK imminently. We are obviously following this up rapidly. If colleagues across the House have concerns, they are very welcome to raise them with me. We are, of course, as I said in the statement, in direct contact with those families who have approached the Foreign Office directly as well. I can also reassure the Shadow Foreign Secretary that we are heavily engaged in the efforts that she describes in relation to Gaza, both in relation to reconstruction, in ensuring that adequate aid gets into Gaza. As I was clear in the statement, the amount of aid getting in remains inadequate. The restrictions remain contrary to the 20-point plan, and we are pushing these points with Israeli authorities, as you would expect, and indeed with all of those with an interest in Gaza. That includes COGAT, CMCC, as she mentioned, but also some of the new institutions formed under the Board of Peace, including High Representative Mladenov, who I saw in Brussels and am in regular contact with. That includes the important discussions about the disarmament of Hamas. Similarly, we remain in regular discussions about the importance of demonstrating real progress in Lebanon on the disarmament of Lebanese Hezbollah, and I was discussing that with the Lebanese Foreign Minister just this week. I'm happy to say a little bit more, Madam Deputy Speaker, about the sanctions that we have put in place already. I came to this House to announce some sanctions in October 2025, which was precisely targeted on senior regime assets in the UK. That has included very significant restrictions on property ownership, which I think she's aware of, up to, I think, a total value of £140 million. And given the serious nature of the topic, I'll resist entering into the discussion and Brexit and whether or not the GCC FTA is long overdue. It was, of course, a negotiation started by the benches opposite. It was a great pleasure to conclude it from these benches.
Chair of the Select Committee, Dame Emily Thornberry.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I welcome the statement by the Minister. I welcome his reiteration of the Government's commitment to international law, and I welcome his statement that the Government is prepared to take further action and will not hesitate to do so when it comes to Palestine. So it has been almost 2 years since the ICJ issued its advisory opinion on Israel and the occupied territories, and calling on the Government to take action. And since then, settler violence has exploded. And just this week, the UN released a report stating in no uncertain terms that the far-right Israeli government is weaponizing Israeli violence, settler violence, to carry out its stated intention of annexing the West Bank. In February, we were told that the government wanted to respond to the advisory opinion with the seriousness and the rigour it deserves. In March, the Minister again told us that the government would update the House on its reaction to the ICJ's advisory opinion. So my question is, when will we stop hesitating and take action to ensure that international law is respected?
Minister.
I'm grateful to the Chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee for the question, which, as she said, she has put to me before. First off, it is important, Madam Deputy Speaker, to emphasise that we continue to take steps to ensure that international law is adhered to, that those principles underline our response both to events in Israel, Palestine, but also across the wider Middle East. I know the House is impatient for a fuller answer in relation to the advisory opinion, even though most of the substantive elements of policy I think I have addressed from this dispatch box. There is, as I know the Right Honourable Lady is a learned lawyer herself, there are some horizontal implications from the advisory opinion which go beyond simply the context in the Middle East, and that's one of the reasons why we've been taking our time. I will endeavour to return to the House with the speed that she demands, which I understand.
Democrat spokesperson Monica Harding.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and to the Minister for advance sight of his statement.
I know that many colleagues like me are frustrated by the government's lack of action to secure progress to a two-stage solution. The UK is rightly committed to the disarmament of Hamas and Hezbollah. These terror groups cannot be allowed to continue destabilising the region, but it's not clear that concrete action is being taken to deliver this. So can the Minister tell me how the government is coordinating international efforts to disarm and disband both groups? Our influence over proscribed groups is less than over a state we call an ally. That is why Liberal Democrats have been so critical of the Minister's failure to hold the Israeli Security Cabinet to account for its extremist actions. I was disgusted by the footage of the far-right Minister Ben-Gvir degrading detainees from the global Samud flotilla. This after celebrating his birthday with a cake emblazoned with a noose, following the passage of a death penalty law targeting Palestinians. It was right that the FCDO called in the Israeli Chargé d'Affaires to register our condemnation, but it is far from sufficient. In the West Bank, settler violence and expansion accelerates. At the start of June, tenders will be delivered for the construction in the E1 area, a move which could kill the chance of a contiguous Palestinian state. In Gaza, Israeli forces push forward their yellow line inch by inch. Their entry of aid continues to be impeded by restrictive measures, while the humanitarian catastrophe only worsens and journalists are still blocked from entering. In southern Lebanon, the IDF demolishes Lebanese houses, entire villages, an abhorrent and illegal operation. And across these issues, the government's muted response and dysfunction can be summarised in a single example: the decision to cut the FCDO's unit for monitoring of international law breaches across Israel and Palestine. So can the Minister set out what steps the government will take if the E1 project continues? Will the Minister ban all UK trade with illegal settlements, reverse cuts to the FCDO's monitoring unit, and press the Israeli government to allow journalists access to Gaza so they can collect what evidence may remain of war crimes committed there?
Madam Deputy Speaker, I just want to be clear about British leadership on these questions. As I said in the statements, before all of the events that she describes Mr Ben-Gvir taking, I had already sanctioned the man from this dispatch box. We have done so in advance of most of our key friends and allies. I saw as I was walking to the chamber that some of our European friends are now considering doing what we did in, I think, August of last year. We have taken action both in company and alone, given the significance of the events in the region, and we will continue to do so. I want to turn, though, to the important points that she raised about some of the Foreign Office structures. I am, Madam Deputy Speaker, particularly sensitive to these questions as a proud former member of the diplomatic service myself. It is important to set out that the world is changing very rapidly, and Foreign Office structures need to change too. So in relation, whether it is to some of the reports today about the Iran unit or the reports in recent weeks about the IHL assessment cell, responsibility lies with ministers to ensure that we are properly served both on advice about Iran and advice about international humanitarian law. I still get that advice. It is true that there do need to be some changes in the structure of the Foreign Office. Since I was in the Foreign Office in 2015, the headcount in the UK, this is counting both departments, has increased by 40% over a decade. That seems to me something we need to address. I spent a great deal of my career overseas. That is where I would like to see the majority of the diplomatic service if we possibly can. And so we do need to make changes. But I want to be clear, there is no unit, not the Iran unit and not the IHL cell, which is being targeted. It's my responsibility to ensure I'm properly advised on both of those questions, and I am. The things referred to this morning, Madam Deputy Speaker, refer to an offer to all staff that they can take part in voluntary redundancy if they would like to. It was not specific to the Iran unit, who do incredibly important work. I was with them this morning, and I'd like to assure the House that I, the Foreign Secretary, and the rest of government continue to be excellently served by the officials of the Foreign Office.
Andy MacDonald.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. This week we've seen 2 Israeli ministers already sanctioned by this government act with impunity. Ben-Gvir assaulting and mocking humanitarian aid activists, and Smotrich saying the Palestinian Authority will get a war, and ordering the ethnic cleansing and apartheid act of the village of Khan al-Ahmar as part of the illegal development of the E1 corridor, a village visited by myself and many colleagues, including the Right Honourable friends, the members for Doncaster North and Ilford North. So as co-chair of the Britain-Palestine APPG, I asked the Minister, does he agree that our diplomacy and our limited sanctions approach are not working to arrest the ongoing genocide? And will he set out what steps he will take with government colleagues to escalate pressure through resourcing the enforcement of the criminal law, including the application of the Proceeds of Crime Act, through updating the overseas business risk guidance, and through ensuring regulatory bodies are advising their members in relation to the continued illegal trade in settlement goods and services?
I know my honourable friend is deeply committed to these issues. He's raised a number of important points about further steps that the British government might take. I'm not in a position to go beyond what I've said in the statement at the moment, other than to reassure him that particularly in relation both to the village that he mentions, which I know has been visited by a large number of members, not just on our benches, but right across the House, that he is absolutely right to say that further development of the E1 settlement would be a hugely damaging step towards a two-state solution, and we will treat any further moves in that direction with the seriousness that they deserve.
David Mundell.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And obviously the trade agreement with the GCC is welcome, but why does the Minister think that it's possible to reach a trade agreement with the GCC but not to influence its members to take a more positive role in resolving the issues in Yemen, Sudan and elsewhere? Because they have a key role to play in these disputes, and I know that he takes a very specific issue in Yemen. So what further can he do to make, for example, the United Arab Emirates play a more positive role there and elsewhere?
Minister.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm grateful to the honourable gentleman for giving me an opportunity to touch briefly on Yemen. Events there remain dire. We continue to see famine right across the country. The behaviour of the Houthis is not in the interest of the Yemeni people. We, of course, have regular and fruitful discussions with all of our partners in the GCC about Yemen, about Sudan, about a whole range of international crises facing us, and will continue to do so.
Alan Gannon.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I thank the Minister for his statement? I'm proud to be part of a Labour government that took the historic decision to recognise the state of Palestine. But the prospect of a single unified Palestinian state is now under enormous pressure from the expansion of illegal settlements. Does the Minister agree that anyone who wishes to have a just and lasting peace in the Middle East must oppose settlement expansion?
Madam Deputy Speaker, it is a great pleasure to answer a question from my honourable friend, not least given he was himself a distinguished member of the diplomatic service, and he is absolutely right.
Wendy Chamberlain.
Madam Deputy Speaker, my constituent Antonis Varadis is a much valued and loved professor at the University of St Andrews, and he is one of a number of British citizens who have been detained by the Israeli authorities in international waters and taken to Israel for processing. I've been in touch with his family, friends, colleagues and students in recent days, and they are all deeply concerned about how he will be treated and when he will be released.
And Israel's National Security Minister Ben Gvir's behaviour of taunting of Gaza peace activists is despicable. And that is the word of the current US ambassador to Israel, Governor Mike Huckabee. And it's very rare that I actually agree with what Governor Huckabee says, but on this occasion, he's absolutely right. And finally, criticism of the current Israeli government over its actions in Gaza and in the West Bank is not anti-Israel, it is not anti-Semitic, it is not being bigoted, it is not being pro-Hamas, it is not being pro-Hezbollah, it is about being a robust and candid friend to an important friend and ally.
It is a powerful contribution from the honourable gentleman opposite, and I'm sure he could hear the welcome that he received from the benches behind me. It is a sign, I think, that those with Israel's long-term interests closest to their hearts make exactly some of the points that he just did, and I was glad to see that he also saw the Egyptian Foreign Minister this week and was able to present the views that he just described to him directly, which I share.
Can I welcome the Gulf countries' trade agreement of this week? Can we give particular thanks to the ministers and the diplomats who've worked hard and delivered it? Given Iranian belligerence towards its neighbours, though, can he further outline what measures we are taking to support Gulf states under threat from Iran and help de-escalate the situation there?
Minister.
I thank my honourable friend for his kind words, and I'm glad for the opportunity to thank both the excellent officials of the Foreign Office, but also the Department for Business and Trade. I'm glad to see the Trade Minister lurk back into the chamber. He has played a central role in ensuring that the FTA was concluded, and we're very grateful for it. In response to my honourable friend's question about the Gulf, we work incredibly closely with our Gulf partners. We were very glad to host the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia's Foreign Minister, the United Arab Emirates Foreign Minister this week. We have been working closely with them to ensure that they can fully defend themselves against Iran's reckless attacks against them, and we will continue to do so.
Ben Maguire.
Madam Deputy Speaker, and I'm grateful to the Minister for his statement, having applied for an urgent question alongside the Westminster Leader of Plaid Cymru and other honourable members. One of my North Cornwall constituents, Katie Davidson, was on board the Global Summit Flotilla.
Stepping up illegal land grabs in the occupied West Bank. So this week's threats by Minister Smotrich to forcibly evict the Palestinian community of Khan al-Ahmar is part of a wider pattern of illegal settlement expansion. There's a growing chorus calling for a ban on all settlement goods and a ban on trade with Israel's illegal settlements. That's what international law demands. What is the government waiting for? What is the minister waiting for?
Minister.
Madam Speaker, I think I addressed these questions in an earlier intervention, but I want to reassure my honourable friend that we continue to treat the situation with the seriousness that it deserves. I'm not going to trail further announcements from the dispatch box today, but obviously we keep all of these matters under close review.
Dr Andrew Morrison.
The behaviour of Smotrich and Ben-Gvir brings shame on all of us who consider ourselves to be friends of Israel. Given that the JCPOA wasn't working, that Iran continued to advance its plans for a nuclear weapon, how would the Minister have defanged the regime? And whilst he is right to claim some level of credit for the FTA with the Gulf states, will he give credit to his predecessors who did a lot of the heavy lifting, and at least concede that the whole thing would not have been possible if we were still in the European Union?
Madam Deputy Speaker, it's a very difficult position to be in, to have one's predecessor ask in Parliament for credit for his predecessors, and I'm very, in the spirit of bipartisanship that we've shown this afternoon, I acknowledge the talks on the GCC FTA were indeed started under the previous government.
But not finished.
But not finished. And I'm sure the Trade Minister, sat to my left, would be keen to emphasise how much heavy lifting recent months and years have required to get it over the line. I won't enter into the hypothetical discussion about how the 2015 to the current day approach to trying to ensure Iran did not have the degree of highly enriched uranium that it now does have could be avoided, but that is the situation we now face. We must have a serious diplomatic process that involves a reduction of that HEU, which is such a danger not just to the region, but to the world, including the UK, and we take that with the seriousness you'd expect.
Imran Hussain.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Even as we debate here today, Israel continues to commit genocide in Gaza and war crimes across Palestine. It is engaging in illegal land grabs. It is expanding illegal settlements at unprecedented levels and is illegally abducting and torturing activists simply for trying to deliver aid to starving children. So our duty under international law is not unclear. What is unclear is this government's courage to act. And all we've heard again today from the Minister, which is becoming somewhat of a repetition here today, is some light condemnation and some promise, vague promise to act at some point in the future. I say this to the Minister, and I say this very sincerely. Even as we debate today, hundreds of Palestinian children are dying and starving. He has a moral and legal duty to act today. Why will he not?
Madam Deputy Speaker, I yesterday myself heard from Palestinian children about the struggles that they face. I have taken steps at every step, Madam Deputy Speaker, to try and ensure that they get the help, the assistance, and are able to exercise their rights, both in relation to their own education, but also the dreadful situation that I described in my statement. I reject his characterisation of my action and the action of the government. We take this with the seriousness that it requires. The condemnation that I've heard right across the House is for a man I have already sanctioned. For the first time in British history, a British minister has sanctioned Israeli ministers, and not just junior ministers, very senior ministers. We did it deliberately. We did it in advance of our partners. Our actions are being considered by others to repeat. I accept his strength of feeling about the suffering. I do not accept his condemnation that we have done nothing.
Dr Ali Chowns.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Minister recognises that the Netanyahu government is imposing a stranglehold on any possibility of Palestinian self-determination, the expansion of settlements, the ongoing horror in Gaza. All of this is completely unacceptable. He says, "I have been clear we are prepared to take further action and will not hesitate to do so." But he comes to this chamber again and again and again to hesitate. It's nearly 2 years since the ICJ judgment. We should have banned settlement trade years ago. It's nearly 1 year since the sanctions that he's repeatedly referred to today. And in that year, what have we seen? Ongoing horror in Gaza, in the West Bank, in Lebanon. The time for hesitation is over. When will this government stop repeatedly hesitating and take action?
Madam Deputy Speaker, I would take the point with more force if we were not today seeing our European partners looking to imitate things that we did some considerable time ago. I recognise the depth of feeling which I share about the suffering in Palestine and across the region, but it is simply not correct to suggest that this government has done nothing. We have set out, both in relation to sanctions, in relation to arms exports and a range of other actions, the action we have taken.
Paula Barker.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Yet again, we have seen a flotilla taking essential aid to Gaza intercepted by Israel. And subsequently, those people who were trying to ensure aid was delivered have been subjected to violence, humiliation and abuse by Ben-Gvir. But we shouldn't be surprised, because last month, Madam Deputy Speaker, the Israeli military approved the return of reservists involved in the rape of a Palestinian man in July 2024, which has become the detention centre where he was has become notorious for torture. And this follows the dismissal of all charges against the Israeli reservists in March this year, when Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu hailed the soldiers as heroic warriors. So what conversations has the Minister had with Israeli officials about this pattern of glorifying rapists and allowing them to serve in the Israeli military? And in his statement, Madam Deputy Speaker, the Minister did say that he's been clear that he is prepared to take further action. What is that action and when will it come?
Minister.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I thank my honourable friend for the question. I can hear the frustration from colleagues, which I often hear when I indicate that further action may be possible but won't trail it before the government does it. That's for long... Well, I've laid out the steps that we've taken so far. Let me turn to the question that my honourable friend asks, which I know she was focused particularly on sexual violence, which is, of course, about the most appalling of crimes. But if she'll permit me, I just want to talk a little bit about the wider situation of justice and accountability. British aid workers have been killed in Israeli strikes in Gaza. There is a reasonable expectation from this House, and indeed across the world, that the Israeli government and the Israeli justice system will ensure accountability for anyone, for everyone, but particularly when foreign nationals are involved. We continue to press for further progress in relation to accountability. If the Israeli government and the Israeli justice system cannot demonstrate that progress, then international partners, including the UK, will draw adverse judgments about what that means about Israeli systems.
Chris Law.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I almost sympathise with the Minister, because really everybody in this House is exasperated at the lack of action. I happen to represent Dundee, which has been twinned with Nablus in the West Bank for the last 45 years, and the members of that association write to you regularly about positive things that could be done. And I'll give you maybe one example, given the fact that we have occupied West Bank and entirely illegal expansion continuing with 34 settlements in April alone. So can I suggest to the Minister, the International Court of Justice has directed states not to trade with Israel in relation to the occupied Palestinian territory, and other European countries such as Spain, Belgium, Netherlands and Ireland are taking steps to unilaterally ban trade with illegal settlements. Now, I said you don't want to put things out early, but I think it's already underway, and why are we not doing it? There's a precedent in UK law and policy of not trading with illegally occupied lands, such as Crimea and other illegally occupied parts of Ukraine. So will the Minister please stop making excuses and outlay when this government will finally uphold its international legal obligations and ban this trade?
Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm reluctant to pass comment on the deliberations of other legislatures, but as I'm sure the honourable member will know, he refers to a number of European Union countries there. They have not taken steps in relation to trade. That's a European Union competence, and they are discussing whether or not they might review their association agreement with Israel, but have not yet done so. I am not here in a competition, but I think it would be any reasonable observer would say that the UK has gone further than the EU in relation to these matters.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I thank the Minister for engaging with me and a group of my constituents and young people and cross-party faith leaders to address this issue. And this is an issue that continues to come up from my constituents. Just recently this week, one of my constituents wrote to me about the flotilla, outlining that this peaceful volunteers were seized in international waters, an act explicitly prohibited under international law. So I welcome the Minister condemning the actions of the Israeli government with regard to the really horrific and disgraceful treatment that we have all seen, and the fact that, you know, the staff are working really hard and to get those British nationals home. And I think the Minister is correct in saying that we would not need this flotilla if they were allowing vital humanitarian aid to get through to Palestinians in so much need. I think the Minister can see the range of frustrations and views from members right across the House, from the Right Honourable Member from Northamptonshire, the Right Honourable Member from the Wrecking, my own friend and member for Middlesbrough and Walthamstow. We want to help the Minister, but again, we are quite concerned that we come back time and time again, and we are not seeing in that meaningful action to really say to the people perpetrating some of these acts, enough is enough. Every life is valuable, every life matters, but we cannot sit back and watch the impunity that is happening. So what more can a minister do with his good office to say enough is enough?
I thank my honourable friend for both the question and for welcoming me to her constituency recently to discuss this. We will continue to take every step that we can in recognition of the seriousness of the situation.
Liz Savile-Roberts.
Yeah, the Minister talked earlier on about accountability. My constituent Chris Hill was kidnapped and held in captivity by Israeli forces this week, and I raised concerns for his well-being in a point of order on Monday. It has taken 3 days for the government to come to the House with an update, during which time people legitimately engaged with supplying humanitarian aid and bearing witness to the Israeli government's aid blockade in Gaza have been subjected to public humiliation and physical harm. As he said earlier on, we know what happens when the doors aren't closed. We can only surmise what happens when the doors are closed. Why is this government's reaction characterised by hesitancy?
I don't accept the characterisation, Madam Deputy Speaker, but I'd like to reassure her that it does not take me being stood in front of this dispatch box to be taking action on behalf of British nationals in distress overseas, and we have been engaged in the case of all British nationals on the flotilla since we were first alerted.
Thank
you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I welcome the statement by the Minister and his condemnation of Ben-Gvir and Smotrich, particularly their horrific and appalling treatment of both Europeans and Palestinians. But will the Minister agree with me that condemnation alone is not sufficient, and Netanyahu, Ben-Gvir, Smotrich should be handed over to ICC for their ongoing genocide in Gaza and the illegal behaviour that they've shown in many aspects to the war that's been happening in the Middle East. Secondly, I welcome his announcing that Iran should not have a nuclear power. But what gives us that right to be the judge and jury for that if we're not demanding the same from Israel? If there is going to be no one in the Middle East to hold nuclear powers, then Israel needs to disarm as well. Does he agree with me?
Madam Deputy Speaker, the UK is a committed member both of the Nuclear Proliferation Treaty and the Rome Statute, and we encourage all states to fully abide by their commitments under both, and that includes in relation to the International Criminal Court.
Patricia Ferguson.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I thank the Minister for his statement today. Madam Deputy Speaker, according to the United Nations, the number of violent incidents in the West Bank caused by illegal settlers increased to a record level last August, with there being no coincidence that that's the time of maximum harvests in the area. So will the government continue to enact sanctions against these violent settler movements? But will we also now start to ban the import of settlement goods? And will the Minister sanction those politicians inciting that violence and responsible for the insidious, in fact not the insidious, the disgraceful legislation enacted against Palestinians, such as the introduction of the death penalty, but also the frankly petty and short-sighted decision to remove recognition of academic degrees gained in Palestine, so that people with those degrees can't work as teachers in Israel or anywhere else where Israel holds sway.
Order. Can I just remind members that questions need to be much shorter if we're going to get business done today? Minister.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm grateful to my honourable friend for the question. I won't go further on sanctions for the reasons I've set out already, but I do, I'm sure my honourable friend is aware that I and the Foreign Secretary condemned the death penalty measures that she refers to, and we continue to do so.
Polly Billington.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm sure my right honourable friend acknowledges the frustration that he can hear across the whole House. Can I make some suggestions of some of the things that he could do in order to be able to make a difference? And that action against companies bidding to build E1, that settlement of 3,400 homes on Palestinian soil, introduce a trade ban of settlement products and services, and suspend trade concessions with Israel. It's clear that criticism alone does not deter the Israeli government. These aren't just my suggestions, they're the suggestions of 32 leading former ambassadors that says that the UK can do this. In that circumstance, surely we should be able to act.
The example of a really nice short answer. Minister.
I thank my honourable friend. I'm aware of the letter.
Warren Jos.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I welcome the Minister coming to the House this afternoon for an update. I do believe that he is genuinely concerned with what is happening in Gaza, but the breaches of international law continue by the Israeli government, and the suffering in Gaza is worsening. So I just have one question to ask. Can the Minister please give us some assurance that we are not still selling arms to Israel, either directly or indirectly, that are then used against the Palestinians?
Can I remind members that we can cut straight to the question? Minister.
I can reassure my honourable friend that we are selling no bombs, no bullets that could be used against the Palestinians.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I will truncate my question. Israel is demonstrating a disinterest in peace and a disregard for international norms. Does my honourable friend agree that we need to place more pressure on our regional partners with whom you've recently created the trade arrangement so that we can achieve the outcomes that our unilateral measures are failing to deliver?
Absolutely agree with my gallant friend that we do need to work with our partners across the region to try and have best effect.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. In Lebanon, the government's contribution to the humanitarian response is welcome, but the response doesn't work when aid workers are being killed, including the 116 healthcare and rescue personnel who have already died. The House is united in condemning these violations of international law, but does the Minister accept, again, that the killing won't stop until there is accountability?
Must be accountability. I met members of the Lebanese Red Cross during my recent visit and was appalled to see further killings amongst their brave number subsequently.
Waller.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Let me declare an interest as the chair of the ADPG for Schools. Can I thank the Minister for visiting the virtual visit to a school in Hebron yesterday. What did he hear directly from pupils at that school about their hopes for peace, and what more can we do to ensure that everyone in Palestine and across the world has the right to education?
I heard, Madam Deputy Speaker, from girls wanting to be doctors and teachers that they couldn't get to school in the morning because of restrictions, that their dads couldn't walk them to school, couldn't pick them up at night. Their education was regularly, very significantly disrupted, and it's on all these points that we need to see progress.
John Grady.
Madam Deputy Speaker, the Finance Minister of Israel, Smotrich, has alleged that there's an arrest warrant issued for him. he has said that this alleged arrest warrant is a declaration of war. And he has said that his first move will be to demolish the village of Khan al-Amar. Does my honourable friend condemn any attempt to put pressure on the International Criminal Court? And will he condemn any attempt to punish the Palestinian people in this way? And does he agree with me that people should face justice for war crimes?
I do on all three questions.
Gilbert.
Deputy Speaker, given all that we've heard today, and whilst I welcome the statement from my right honourable friend, adds to my concern and that of my constituents about the reported closure of the Conflict and Security Monitoring Project. I've seen firsthand how important this work is and the projects they do to monitor human rights violations in the region. Can my honourable friend give the House assurances that the Foreign Office is still able to track the level of potential breaches of international law in Israel, Palestine and Lebanon compared to this time last year?
I can offer my friend that assurance.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank the Minister for his statement. I declare an interest as a member of the Board of Deputies of British Jews, but I speak for myself. The actions of Minister Gavir, seen on the news last night, are an utter disgrace. And as a Jewish MP, I was ashamed, for sometimes it is not easy to be a Jewish MP in this House. Does the Minister agree that the actions of certain Israeli ministers are not the responsibility of the Anglo-Jewish population? Absolutely. And that there can be no excuse for the terrible epidemic of anti-Semitism we've seen on British streets?
I couldn't agree more with my honourable friend. The actions of the Israeli government are nothing to do with British Jewry. I was so pleased and honoured to be with members of the community on Monday and made that very point to them. There is no excuse of any kind for anti-Semitism. Israel has absolutely nothing to do with it.
And that concludes the statement, and I thank members for shortening their questions so we could get everybody in. I'll let the front benches just move swiftly along. In the next statement. Thanks very much. Statement. Minister Chris Bryant.
With your permission, Madam Deputy Speaker, I wish to make a statement on the Government's return to the humble address on Andrew Mountbatten Windsor. I shall speak briefly because I'm conscious of the time today. Madam Deputy Speaker, I have today laid before the House documents the Government has identified that the House requested in the 24th of February 2026 humble address, covering the creation of the role of Special Representative for Trade and Investment in 2001, the appointment of Andrew Mountbatten Windsor and the advice of officials and ministers. This has not been straightforward. Departments have changed in the intervening years and most documentation was then paper-based. In addition, we have had to be careful about not compromising the police investigation. I'm glad to say that we have published 11 documents today, including the formal appointment proposal, evidence that ministers were content with the proposal, internal communications, media and press briefings. And these documents speak for themselves, of course, and all honourable members can read them. They're available in the Vote Office. But I want to assure the House that we have proceeded on the basis of maximum transparency and have only redacted material that bears no relevance to Andrew Mountbatten Windsor, such as travel proposals for other members of the royal family or content that would otherwise prejudice international relations. I reiterate, the Government is fully cooperating with Thames Valley Police in their investigation into potential misconduct in public office. I commend this statement to the House.
Minister Dame Harriet Baldwin.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker, and can I thank the Minister for advance sight of both the long version of his statement and the short version of his statement. So obviously we support the humble address and we continue to support full transparency on this matter. So I just have a few questions for the Minister. Is this, and I think he said this is just the start of a full disclosure, and could he share with the House if there is going to be further disclosure, or is this the final amount? Can he give the House, if there are going to be further tranches, a clear and final timetable for when the process will be complete? Is the absence of a formal record of due diligence or any vetting process evidence that the Government itself raised no questions at the time about the appointment? And where, if anywhere, are the documented concerns or challenge from officials or ministers at the time? And can I ask the Minister directly, when will the full set of files that this House has requested relating to Lord Mandelson's role, particularly any advice, correspondence or due diligence connected to his appointment, be released to the House? Finally, the Minister has a large trade envoy programme today under his responsibility. So what due diligence is the government doing on appointees to that trade envoy programme, and are they following a code of conduct governing their behaviour today? Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Yes, there was a long version, but to be honest, I was basically reading out the written ministerial statement which we laid at 10:30 this morning, and I thought that was a bit, much as I love the sound of my own voice, I'm not sure that the House does. So I thought I would go, I think I have united the House now, I thought I would go for the shorter version, and to be honest, the papers do speak for themselves. Will there be more, was one of her questions. I suspect there won't. I think this is nearly everything, and I think this is everything we have come across so far, certainly. Of course, we will keep on looking, notwithstanding the complexity that there is about searching in paper-based systems in multiple different departments. I guarantee the House that if there is more to publish, I will come back to the House with more, but I suspect that this may be our last tranche. She asked whether ministers raised questions back at the time. I have published everything that relates to that period. That is, I think, there's nothing else, I think, to be found. So the statements that say that ministers were content, I think, is the sum total of the response. And I suppose to some degree that is understandable, bearing in mind that the Palace had made it very clear that Her Majesty, Her late Majesty, was very keen that Andrew be given a job, and Andrew was keen to take on the job, and the job had previously been done by another member of the royal family, in broadly speaking, the same set of terms. I'm afraid I can't answer the question about the Lord Mandelson papers for the simple reason that I've been trying very much to keep this humble address very separate from the other one. We had a different set of procedures to go through. I briefed members of the Conservative front bench and indeed members of the Liberal Democrat front bench earlier this week, when they indicated that they'd be perfectly happy if we weren't making a statement or an urgent question of any kind, because the papers speak for themselves. On trade envoys, it's a perfectly legitimate point. I made the point last time round that whilst I understand the connection people make between the role that Andrew Mountbatten Windsor played and modern trade envoys, they are actually very, very different, partly because of the royal nature of Andrew's role in the past, but also because all trade envoys that we appoint at the moment are, of course, members of either this House or the House of Lords. They're not only bound by the code of conduct of this House or the other House, but they're also bound in exactly the same way as any minister would be in terms of the code that is expected of them. So we make all of this extremely clear to trade envoys. I've gathered the trade envoys since I've been appointed, I think, together on 2 or 3 occasions now, and whenever a new one is appointed, I sit with them and go through the details. I can hear the honourable member at the back chuntering in his regular application process to be made a trade envoy, and I'm still considering his proposal.
Liberal Democrat spokesperson Wendy Chamberlain.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Minister has so far given us 2 reasons for why his written statement, or the statement he's just given at the dispatch box, is different from the one that was sent embargoed an hour ago. If it's the same as the written statement, why was it sent out as embargoed? And dare I say it, Madam Deputy Speaker, I should say that transparency should not be trumped by time limits in relation to the business of this House. But it's been 3 months since the House passed the Liberal Democrat humble address to release the files showing how and why Andrew Mountbatten Windsor was appointed as a UK Special Representative for Trade and Investment. And in that time until today, the Government has only published 1 written statement which told us very little. The Minister has not previously come to the dispatch box at all, and I do have to note the difference in relation to the humble address in the name of the official opposition for Peter Mandelson and the humble address that we're discussing now. Now, the files we have seen show that there was no vetting by the government, and even without vetting, no questions appear to have been asked. And the lack of documentation provided is itself concerning, as is the time taken to get this far. The Minister has said that he's not sure if there is more. Can I ask him when he will be sure and when he will release any remaining documents? And the documents we do have clearly show concerns about the potential for conflicts of interest. It started with golf, but we all know what came next. And why did that not lead to any scrutiny or vetting, not just at the start, but at any stage during his tenure as an envoy? The guardrails were not in place. The appointment came into effect over a year after ministers said they were happy for it to happen, and the files also show that the then Prime Minister had been aware from the start and also did nothing. There was time for these warning signs to be taken seriously. Why were no questions asked at all in that period? And in his written statement in the House earlier today, the Minister excused the lack of vetting and oversight because it was a royal replacing a royal. Does he agree that safeguards must be put in place for any future appointments like this? And can he please tell the House whether officials or ministers were aware at the time of Andrew's connection to Jeffrey Epstein, which had already been established when this appointment was made? Was this connection monitored? And can, finally, the Minister confirm that, given their absence in this release, that there are no documents pertaining to communications with Peter Mandelson about this appointment?
Madam Deputy Speaker, if I'm honest, I'm a bit miffed by the attitude of the Liberal Democrat front bench, because I have regularly updated the Liberal Democrat front bench ever since the humble address was brought forward. I have been as open and as possible as with their front bench, and they have indicated privately, regularly to me, that they were perfectly happy with the progress that we were making. There are some difficulties about which I thought would be difficult for us to overcome. In particular, the connection between this and the police investigation. We obviously don't want to do anything that would imperil the police investigation. I think all honourable members would agree that if the police were to find evidence and felt that the Crown Prosecution Service should take forward charges in relation to misconduct in public office, we would all support the prosecuting authorities in doing their duty. I explained all of this to her honourable friends, and they indicated that they were perfectly happy with that process. I had thought that the police might ask us not to publish some of the material. In actual fact, they've been very cooperative, and they've allowed us to publish everything. And we have done some minor redactions, as I say. Some of those are in relation where it has absolutely nothing to do with Andrew Mountbatten Windsor. For instance, when they're talking about the Royal Visits Committee, when they're talking about visits by other royal members of the royal family, then we haven't published that. We've redacted that material out. And also where there are possibilities that we might be upsetting our international allies. But she asked me in particular, therefore, about whether there are going to be any more papers that might be coming along. I'm not aware of any at this point. I suspect, as I said earlier, that this is the sum total of what we have. Now, she makes the point quite rightly, and I think a lot of people are surprised, of course, as I think we've known for some time that there was no vetting done. It has been standard not to vet members of the royal family. She asked me if we were going to would we vet anybody else who was appointed to such a role. We have no intention of appointing anybody to such a role in the future. But of course, we are grateful for the support that the royal family regularly provide. International visits around the world, His Majesty's visit to the United States of America, I think everybody, including those who disagreed with the visit, everybody has accepted that it was a great success. And I don't think we should be vetting His Majesty the King, and I don't think she's suggesting that either. So I think she was just trying to get grumpy with me, and I think that I've tried to answer all the honourable ladies' questions. But I would reassure her, honestly, we have moved at pace as fast as we possibly can. It's difficult to find some of the paperwork because it is literally paperwork, and the government departments have changed multiple times in the intervening years. But we have moved as fast as we can.
Mr. Speaker, can I just say, for the record, I've not made any formal application to be a trade and investment envoy, and I previously was a trade and investment envoy under Prime Minister Theresa May, now in another place. What I am concerned about is that that particular programme is not cross-party. It was set up by then Lord Cameron, David Cameron, now in another place. And its strength, I felt, Madam Deputy Speaker, was in the fact that it was cross-party rather than full of mostly Labour members and Labour peers. So I just wanted to put that on the record. The Minister references the amount of paper, and it's paper-based, this exercise. But of course, we haven't all gone to cloud overnight, and if you go down to Kew in the National Archives, you'll find a lot of paper down there where we can actually obtain records going back quite a long time, not just the last 20 or so years. But I wanted to ask him on a more substantive point, and that is the role of the FCDO. He will know, as a former foreign minister, that diplomatic telegrams are sent by embassies, often by ambassadors, back to London, and possibly even to the royal household. And I wonder whether any of those have been disclosed in the papers, which I have not had time to read today, because they've only just been laid. And then finally, whether any of those diptels or a response to those diptels have made their way to the office of senior royal officials in the royal household, and whether they knew anything about the activities of the former Prince Andrew, and who did they speak to about it, and what action, if any, was taken?
Well, he says he's not applied for a post as a trade envoy. I mean, I don't want to show the House the text messages he sent me. But anyway, and he makes a fair point. You know, I want to make sure that the Trade Envoy programme is one that is really effective and really delivers around the world. I was with Lord Alderdice the other day, obviously not a member of the Labour Party, at the London Stock Exchange when the Uzbek National Investment Fund was being listed in the UK, and we very much hope that his intervention in Uzbekistan has been enormously important in helping take forward some of these investments and into the UK and listings at the LSE. Indeed, we could see a further investment at the LSE, which would be the biggest ever listing here. We also have the Honourable Member for Mid-Norfolk, who's a Conservative member, who's a trade envoy and does a good job. I didn't understand the question he was asking me about diptels. As I said earlier, we are trawling through everything we possibly can to see whether there is anything else that is of relevance under the humble address terms. But so far, we have published everything that we have that is relevant. And I can guarantee the House that if there is anything more, then of course we will come forward. I should just say that I was also asked about whether there was any monitoring of the relationship between Andrew and Jeffrey Epstein by the Honourable Lady speaking for the Liberal Democrats. I didn't answer that question, I apologise. I have seen absolutely nothing to that effect either. So if I had, I would have published it.
And Kirsty Blackman.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I first make clear I have no desire to be a trade envoy. Aberdeen is the best place on earth and I don't want to be anywhere other than there if I can help it. In terms of the statement that the Minister of State made, he said people are still looking. Would he be willing to advise us if they stop looking? I appreciate that they are currently perhaps actively looking because there are maybe boxes that they haven't gone through. Will he advise us at the point where there is definitely an end to this unless somebody accidentally comes across something? And then the second question is in relation to the trade envoys going forward. I'm not sure how happy or comfortable or how changed the process is for appointing trade envoys, but can he give us reassurance that the process is much better than it used to be? And if it's not, can he give us reassurance that he will look at that process to ensure that we can all feel comfortable that our trade envoys are the right people, or certainly not the wrong people to be doing that role?
Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm grateful to her that she doesn't want to be a trade envoy. I often feel as if I am a trade envoy for Scotland because we're often securing good deals, as we just have in the GCC and for that matter in India. We've just done remarkably well. I see the Honourable Lady for Plaid Cymru shaking her head. We've just done really well for Welsh lamb farmers in the GCC deal in the Gulf. Will I come back to the House when we stop? I'm suggesting that we have I don't think there will be any more material. I will come back, obviously, if there is more material, and if I need to make probably a written ministerial statement, I think, rather than an oral statement, just to say that we have now ceased the process, and I will do that. She asked about due diligence. It's a significant point, and of course we do due diligence before anybody is appointed as a trade envoy under the present scheme. As I say, very different from what happened in relation to Andrew Mountbatten Windsor, and I should say that the DBT Select Committee is presently doing an inquiry on some of these issues. I'm very happy to talk about the present Trade Envoy programme with them, but obviously there are delicacies about what we say about the past in case we were to enter into a situation which could compromise the police investigation. I'm very keen not to do that. I'm very glad that the police have been very helpful to us today in enabling us to be able to publish everything we can.
And the final question on this statement, Monica Harding.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Downing Street spokesperson is currently saying that a further tranche of files relating to the appointment are to be published at a future date, which is different from what the Minister is saying at the dispatch box. Perhaps he could clarify?
Well, to be absolutely clear, I think this is probably the last tranche of material that we have. If I had more to publish, I would have published it today. I haven't got anything more to publish. So if there were more stuff, I reserve the right to publish more if there is more. But we're entering into speculation to some degree here. As I say, if there is more, we will publish it. I have instructed officials all along to work as fast as we possibly can and to be as transparent as we possibly can, and that's precisely what we will do. But as I say, at the moment, there isn't any more to publish. And by the way, Madam Deputy Speaker, we got a great GCC deal with the Gulf yesterday.
And that concludes the statement. I'll just give the front benches a few moments to swap over. Clerk will now proceed to read the orders of the day.
Steel Industry Nationalisation Bill, second reading.
Now. The reasoned amendment in the name of the Leader of the Opposition has been selected. Minister to move second reading.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I beg to move that the bill be read a second time. Madam Deputy Speaker, for generations, the steel industry has stood at the very heart of our national story. From the furnaces of Sheffield to the docks of Port Talbot, from Scunthorpe to Redcar, steel forged not only the railways, ships and bridges and factories that powered the Industrial Revolution, steel built communities, livelihoods and a sense of pride in Britain. Steel made in Britain built our navy, helped defend our freedoms in times of war, and laid the foundations for a modern infrastructure right around the world. When people speak of the United Kingdom becoming a great industrial nation, they speak of the skill, the resilience, and the determination of steelworkers who helped shape that destiny by the fruits of their labour. The decline of the steel industry destroyed jobs, diminished skills, and damaged communities. But it never, ever diluted the pride, resilience and determination of those working people. Today, this steel industry nationalisation bill repays in part the debt that we owe Britain's steel communities. Steel is integral to the key growth-driving sectors of our industrial strategy, to advance manufacturing and the car industry, to clean energy in our wind turbines and in our grid infrastructure, to security and defence, the fighter jets, battleships and submarines. It is essential to this government's growth mission to create a strong, resilient economy delivering for working people. That's why Britain's steel sector accounts for thousands of jobs right across the country. I will give way.
And the nationalisation of steel, for the reasons that he mentioned, is of course a noble endeavour and something which many of us will agree with across the House, but he must rightly recognise that there are people in Wales pointing to the fact that there are now two pieces of legislation in relation to nationalising steel, while at Port Talbot we lost thousands of jobs. Does he recognise the feelings that remain in Wales? Because The option of nationalisation from this government was not on the table at the time.
As she knows, I've been to Port Talbot myself. I've launched a steel strategy since I came into office and we came into office. The vast majority of the decline to which she described happened under the previous administration. We are clearing up the mess on a whole bunch of fronts, on different areas of our public life. And I've invested, and this government has invested £500 million into that plant. And we have launched the steel strategy, which I believe will give it a very fruitful, prosperous future. We are doing what it takes to be the partner that they need in these times. And of course I'll give way.
I thank the honourable friend for giving way. The point, I think, which was made before is that the nationalisation of the steel industry makes an explicit linkage between our domestic and our international policy, and the explicit need for us to go out and champion our steel sector by filling its order books in the way that wonderful trade deals that have been created in Nigeria with the expansion of its port and the railway projects behind it has been achieved by this government. That's the type of work I'm doing in Southern Africa. It's the type of work that we should all be going out to do on behalf of our country and our growth agenda.
I'm very grateful for his intervention. Of course, the work that he is doing is incredibly important into fulfilling the mission and the possibility that the British steel sector has in the 2020s going forward. And that is the purpose of having a strategy where we invest, we modernise, and then, of course, at times we need to protect as well. These are the things that we are doing, and these are the things that will deliver a long-term, sustainable, and also, yes, global future for Britain's steel industry. I will give way.
Just two quick questions, if he wouldn't mind. If this bill proceeds through the House, first question is, how does he think the global competition to compete with British forged steel will react? What are they likely to do? And secondly, if our steel becomes more expensive than the global market norm, what will manufacturers in the UK, what choice will they be faced with about where to base their manufacturing?
I'm grateful. I'm not sure why he would think it would be more expensive as a result. But take one step back. If we didn't protect, there would be no steel sector in order to export in the first place. So that is why I took the decision to invest, to modernise, and also protect where needed. If we had carried on the same trajectory, for this government that we inherited from the previous one, I really would fear for any steelworks at all being capable of doing any exports, let alone domestic supply as well. So this is the future that we are now creating. I'm going to make some progress because the debate has been cut short, and I have taken quite a few interventions, and I'm sure I'll find time later in my opening remarks, but let me make a bit of progress. I have pledged to make sure that Britain retains its capacity and its capability to manufacture steel. It is a commitment that I have made to honourable members in this House, and it is my commitment to the steel communities of this country. It is what underpins the steel strategy, and it is the primary purpose of the legislation that we are debating today. This House acted to support British Steel last year, one of the country's most vital steel firms. We recalled Parliament to pass the Steel Industry Special Measures Act so that the company's blast furnaces could remain lit and its workforce remain protected. I'm grateful to my predecessor, my right honourable friend, the member for Stalybridge and Hyde, for his leadership during that time. And I am grateful to the House for supporting that vital piece of legislation. When we intervened then, we were certain there was a future for British steel. Our determination now is that the future may best be served by full public ownership in the national interest, not because of ideology, but because of practical pragmatism. Public ownership would allow us to explore future opportunities for this company and to retain its vital resource as a critical piece of our national infrastructure, one that is essential to economic resilience. I'll give way in a moment. One that is essential to our economic resilience, I want the company to play its part in driving up our domestic steel production to ensure that 50% of the steel used in this country is made in this country. I give way.
Gentleman for giving way. In keeping the options open that he hints at, has he had any discussions with his colleagues in defence, since there will always be, at least for the foreseeable future, a need for virgin steel for certain defence applications?
He raises a really important point. This is a government determined to make, produce and use more steel from the British sector in lots of different areas of the economy. We want to make sure that we are using government spending and procurement in driving up steel production in the UK. I had the privilege in a different sector to visit the Agratas gigafactory in Somerset. That's using 231 tonnes of British steel in its production. It does show, and of course that one investment is using a mounted investment from government as well. So government investment, private sector investment, and using British steel. It does show that actually when we align our priorities, we can drive up demand for British steel. I'll give way. Yeah.
Secretary of State for giving way. I want to ask him about the breadth of this bill. So in clause 1 of the bill, it makes it clear that a steel undertaking includes those businesses that have as part of their operations the manufacture or processing of iron or steel. Is there any lower threshold to that, or can a business which only has 1% of its operations in iron and steel be liable to nationalisation under this bill? And under clause 2, the Secretary of State is entitled to determine the public interest and can do so if nationalisation would support the economy of the UK or any part of the UK. Same question. Is there a lower threshold? Or would the interests of one town where a steel facility is located be sufficient to justify nationalisation of an entire company?
Grateful for the intervention. The public value test is a high test, and I think he will agree upon seeing the legislation, reading it as he has done, that is the case. I've set the bar high enough that this would only be triggered in extraordinary circumstances. Now, these are things that we can test when we go to committee stage in the coming days, I believe next week, or when we return from recess in the next sitting week. Don't worry, we're not recalling Parliament again. And I'll address this a bit more in my speech to come. This is not a power that will be used routinely. This is a power that is specific, and the test for it will be high. Now, to that end, and I'll make some progress. To that end, we began good faith negotiations with the owners of British Steel, Jingye, to see if a commercial sale was viable, but that was not proved possible. We could not agree terms that would have simultaneously safeguarded the integrity of the business and safeguarded the interests of the taxpayer. That is why the Prime Minister announced that the government's intention to bring British Steel into public ownership, subject to the public interest test being met at the time of that decision. And that's why we need to pass the Steel Industry Nationalisation Bill now, to give us the power to make that possible. Now, let me be clear to the House, again, in answer to his question. The powers being given to the government by this legislation cannot be exercised without due caution and proper care. These powers are bold, but they are not boundless. They can only be used where there is a clear public interest and where they will be needed to safeguard British steelmaking capability. The bill itself does not, of itself, nationalise British Steel. It grants the government powers to do so if considered necessary. That's the scope of the legislation that we are debating today. Madam Deputy Speaker, for too long... I will.
Being very generous. And I take him at his word. I don't think that he intends to use this legislation otherwise than appropriately. But there is an important point to be made about the language which is in the bill as it stands. And as he knows, at the moment, the public interest is defined in certain ways in clause 2 of the bill, but what it says is that that is a definition that is not limited So there could be other grounds on which the public interest might be met. And I've already pointed out one aspect in which that public interest test is relatively broad. So can I invite him to look again at the public interest test to make sure not just that we rely on his word, which I do, but also that we are confident that succeeding Secretaries of State cannot misuse this power to nationalise too broadly.
I'm very grateful for his intervention again. I can see this is an important part. I knew when I was bringing these powers in and working through the legislation that this was going to be an important part of this legislation and quite rightly subject of scrutiny. Again, there will be time because there's significant time in committee of the whole House so that members can scrutinise this. But just to say that we're modelling this bill on the Banking Act, and the Banking Act, I think, has worked effectively. And you can see in that circumstance where the powers were used during the financial crisis, it was used in extremis, and the powers that were brought in there for which we're modelling this on have not been used irresponsibly since. I've been very clear in my use and my expected use of these powers, and the bar that I see set in the legislation meets my expectations, including the limits of my power to use it in ways that I think would cause concern for members across this House. Madam Deputy Speaker, for too long, the steel sector in this country has been left to fend for itself, abandoned by government, demoralised, starved of resources, and victim to international market distortions. Crude steel production has declined by more than 50% in the last decade. Capabilities have been reduced. Communities have been let down. Previous governments have been too reactive and not proactive. This government will not repeat the errors of the past. We are building the future for British steel. While the industry faces challenges today, we will do everything we can to help it modernise and to grow. This legislation allows us to apply that policy to this industry. We recognise that securing the long-term future of the UK steel sector relies on both public and private investment for modernisation. For the UK to become a global leader in clean, green steel, in electric arc furnaces and decarbonised steel production. We recognise that blast furnace production will need to continue in the immediate future, and that a managed transition is vital to maintaining supply. We need this legislation to raise resilience, to protect businesses up and down the country who depend on Britain's steel, to defend the workforce at British Steel, and to safeguard the communities built on British steel. The significance of steel is not simply a matter of history, it is a matter of our national future. In an uncertain world, the ability to make steel remains a strategic national asset. Steel is essential for our transport networks, our energy security, our housing and our transition to a greener economy. That is why supporting the British steel industry is about more than protecting jobs, important though those obviously are. Supporting British steel, I'll give way in just a moment. Supporting British steel is more than about national pride, though we are proud of the steelworkers who helped build it. Nationalising British steel is about hope and faith in the future. I give way.
I thank my right honourable friend for giving way. I didn't want to interrupt him, but I thought it was an appropriate time to intervene. As a member of the GMB Trade Union Executive Council, I was really pleased to see my union welcome the government's move to nationalise British Steel, which they described as decisive and timely intervention that will protect one of the UK's most important industries. And this is a sentiment that has been echoed throughout the trade union movement. So does my right honourable friend agree that we must engage with the trade unions throughout this process and utilise their expertise in this area to secure the long-term future of British steel?
Look, he raises a really important point. You know, the workers in steel production facilities have played a really important role in shaping our policies, helping us constructively to find a way through. Members on both sides were prodding me to release the steel strategy swifter, but at the time of developing the steel strategy, there were so many moving parts to it. There are global forces at work. There were different ownership models. There were different points and different production facilities with different challenges in different parts of the steel community. The voices that were expressed in the constructive, and I say this again, the highly constructive role played by the unions, GMB and Community, I pay absolute tribute to the way that those unions and others really helped to design and find a way through some really challenging strategic issues for which we had to find our way. Now, together with our measures on automotives and digital technology, life sciences, the defence industries, clean energy, ceramics and chemicals, for which we made announcements just today, and advanced manufacturing, taking the power to make possible the nationalisation of British steel heralds the new dawn of an age of British industrialisation. I give way.
Secretary of State for giving way. But given that no UK steel producers produce the level and the specialist grades of steel used by precision engineers like Gibbs Gears in Stoke Mandeville in my constituency that supply components to the aerospace and defence sector, what can the Secretary of State say is in this bill for them? Because all they can see is tariffs incoming on the steel that they necessarily have to import because nobody makes it here.
You will know that when I took the difficult decision to introduce measures, I did so against products that would compete directly with the products that we are making, are capable of making domestically. Specialty steel, of course, is going through an administration process at the moment. But when that is complete and it is up and running properly, I need to make sure that the market for its products and services are actually protected and able to be viable domestically. And I think everyone in this House should, in the world that we are living in, where national resilience is so incredibly important to our nation and the economy in a way that it simply hasn't been for decades and decades, the decisions I am making to make sure that we have British steel production that can be viable and sustainable into the future is of paramount importance. I'm going to make a bit more progress. With government working alongside businesses to invest, modernise and protect Britain's manufacturing base, the amendment would deny second reading to the bill. The very people who did so much to damage the steel in government are now trying to do so again from opposition. Then, as tragedy, now as farce. The House should reject it as such. Britain's steel industry needs an activist, interventionist government. It needs determination, decisiveness and delivery. It does not need a government with its hands tied, its room for manoeuvre blocked and its ability to act denied. Britain must have a strong domestic steel industry now and into the future. I beg to move.
The question is that the bill be now read a second time, and before I call the Shadow Minister, can I just say to members that there are a lot of members that want to put their remarks on the record as they've got a direct constituency interest, quite rightly. I will be starting with an immediate 6-minute time limit for backbench speeches, but very swiftly moving to 3 minutes to enable as many as we can to get in to speak on this very, very important topic. Shadow Minister.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Conservatives will never be neutral about the deindustrialisation of our country. But we don't believe that politicians or Whitehall bureaucrats should run businesses. Instead, we need a government that does fewer things better. Defending our nation, securing energy supplies and restoring the nation's finances. We believe in British steelmaking and the importance of sovereign capabilities, and not just steelworks, but the steel supply chain, critical minerals and many defence-related technologies. But that is not what this bill does. This bill is the government's attempt to break out of a mess we warned 1 year ago they were getting themselves into. And it fails even in the government's own terms. It does not keep the blast furnaces open, and it does not guarantee that military needs can be met domestically. So let's be clear what we are doing today. We're being asked to nationalise British Steel, to put the British taxpayer permanently on the hook for a business this government had every chance to keep in private hands and chose not to. They ignored plans to open electric arc furnaces on Teesside and chose to let the situation deteriorate until the only option left was the one that suited their ideology. The Prime Minister went kowtowing to China, gave them an embassy spy base, and instead of a deal on Jingi, came back with a box of fortune cookies with only a bill for the taxpayer to be found inside. Of course I'll give way.
For giving way, can I just seek some clarity from him? Is the Conservative Party position that they would prefer British steel in the hands of the Chinese than the British?
There was a wasted intervention, Madam Deputy Speaker. If he lets me continue, I will explain exactly what the Conservative plan for British Steel, and it's a better plan and a more sustainable plan than we've heard from the government today. This government didn't inherit.
I'm most grateful to the Shadow Minister for giving way. As he was unable to answer the previous intervention, perhaps he'd like to explain why the Conservative government did sell British Steel to the Chinese in 2019 against my specific advice.
I know that that when it suits him, the honourable gentleman claims to be a fan of the late Margaret Thatcher, but he seems to have forgotten that most of her time in office was untangling the mess of Labour's nationalisations in the past. And unlike him, she didn't bend with the wind or find herself in the same lobby as a government that's hiked taxes to record highs, driven wealth offshore, or is drowning business in red tape. Now, honourable members would like to know what our plan is. And our plan is to address the cause, not the symptoms. They would be well to listen to this, Madam Deputy Speaker. We might have more of a steel industry left if they do. Because you cannot have an industrial policy for steel without an energy policy for industry. Britain has the highest industrial energy electricity prices in the world. And every choice that the government is making has pushed those prices further up. This week, they voted against new licences in the North Sea, choosing to import from Norway gas that could be drilled here at a cost of 200,000 jobs, 12 billion in tax revenue. Now, Secretary of State does know this. Their backbenchers know this. But the Prime Minister is too weak to stand up to his windmill fetishist Energy Secretary. We have offered an alternative. Our cheap plan would slash energy prices and improve energy security. Why would they not want that? And if the government was genuinely interested in securing the future of steel making, so much as many other industries, they could be coming here today and adopting that plan. Instead, this bill is an indictment. I'll happily give way as long as he's going to talk about the cheap energy plan that we're talking about.
Wait, so I've heard that he thinks that energy prices should come down. We don't disagree on that point. But what he still hasn't answered is, does he think British Steel should remain foreign-owned? Yes or no?
The only way that we're going to have a sustainable steel-making industry in this country, and the same in terms of the manufacturing sector and our defence supply chain, is lower energy costs. That is the only sustainable way. We've got a plan for sustainable steelmaking. They don't have a plan for sustainable steelmaking. Ministers themselves have admitted that the blast furnaces in Scunthorpe will close. They're reverting to a plan that already exists. This bill is an indictment of the government's modus operandi, a spray and pray government which writes blank cheques on the taxpayer and calls that a strategy. We're doomed to relearn the hard lessons of the 1970s. If it moves, tax the hell out of it, and when it stops moving, subsidise it. It was socialist idle Tony Benn, who wanted to nationalise everything that moved, and one result that they may care to look at was the state-owned Kirby Manufacturing and Engineering Company that simultaneously made car radiators and orange juice. When the government last run British Steel in the late 1970s, its losses hit £1.3 billion a year. Since Labour's botched nationalisation of just a year ago, it's already spent $500 million of taxpayers' money. That's 1.3 million a day. Where is the government's published, costed, scrutinised plan for what nationalised British Steel will look like in 5 years' time, even in 1 year's time? Because I've read this bill, and there is not one. There's no provision for a proper impact assessment before the sweeping powers are used. There's no acknowledgement of the monumental decommissioning liabilities in the billions that will sit on the Treasury's balance sheet. And while there is a sunset clause, it can be extended indefinitely by ministers, a sunset on which the sun never sets. Madam Deputy Speaker, the House deserves better than this. We deserved a bill with a proper thought-through plan. They've turned a negotiation into a crisis into an emergency, and the emergency into this nationalisation. We know that ministers, however well-meaning, will be unable to resist using their power to tilt the playing field in favour of steel businesses that they themselves will own. No longer the referee on the pitch wearing the shirts of one of the teams. And there's no better example of that than their plans on steel tariffs. Yeah, I'll talk.
The Shadow Minister for giving way. What does he make of tilting the balance in favour of the community in Redcar and across Teesside when his government sat on their hands and saw the blast furnace go to the wall? Is that his definition of sustainability, to let those businesses and communities collapse?
I think he would be, the honourable member would be better addressing that to his own ministers who, notwithstanding the nationalisation, also acknowledge that the blast furnaces will cease. They will go dark. They will close on this government's watch. This bill does not protect the blast furnaces, and you should invite the minister when he winds up to talk about the future of that. There was a plan to invest in British Steel, in Redcar, to secure those jobs. The government pulled the chain. There was absolutely a plan to open arc furnaces in Redcar. Before the election, that was absolutely the case. To move Scunthorpe operations to Redcar. Now, I asked him to address the issue of tariffs, and there's no better example. There's no better example of the folly of these plans. Now, I'm going to make some progress on tariffs, because a number of honourable members have raised the very important issue, giving light to the way that they are tilting the playing field on tariffs. And we've seen already under this government a flurry of Trump-style tariffs that double steel tariffs and halve quotas. And what they're doing, Madam Deputy Speaker, is elevating the interests of one firm over the automotive, aerospace, advanced manufacturing and defence sectors. Firms involved in the supply chains of AUKUS and Tempest are looking right now at having to shift tooling and jobs to other countries instead of manufacturing components here.
I thank the Shadow Minister. He's making an excellent speech, but specifically on tariffs. Does he agree with me that there's an illogical approach to this, because actually what's going to happen is by reducing the quotas, you decrease the supply, and then increasing the tariff, you increase the cost. And even if I was listening to the Secretary of State very closely, he was talking about getting domestic production here. By the time that happens, most of these businesses will have gone to the wall. Does he agree that it's very illogical, the approach?
And makes exactly the right point, and it's a point not just made by him. It's a point made by other members. It's a point made across the manufacturing industry. And we are at risk of losing critical parts of our defence and aerospace and automotive supply chain.
I'm very grateful to my honourable friend. And would he agree with me that while the bill that's being presented today appears to be an attempt at a simple solution for one industry, but that we need to be careful what we wish for here? At a time when we have massive oversupply globally of steel, to have elevated and protected steel markets here when, for example, a huge amount of steel is used in the car industry, which is currently competing. I don't know how many of you have seen the number of Chinese cars that are appearing on our streets at the moment, but competed with finished goods that are coming in using all that cheap oversupply steel. We don't really stand a chance of competing. And we'll end up subsidising the car industry like we did back in the 1970s. This is particularly impacting in my constituency, where firms, as I've said to the Secretary of State, like Stannah Stairlifts, are involved in advanced manufacturing using steel, and they're facing no choice now but to consider offshoring their production, just as he says.
Well, both of my right honourable and my honourable friend make exactly the point, and we need a more thoughtful approach. I've written to the Secretary of State asking that the tariffs be delayed. Many of my colleagues have written to the Secretary of State asking the tariffs be delayed for 6 months while the department do more work, that they investigate more specialist grade of steels, so within the broader tariff buckets, that they look again at grades of steel alloys that are used in the defence, aerospace and automotive sector that are simply not made here today, and perhaps there are unintended consequences of their tariff. Be more forensic about that approach, and also bring forward the measures we've talked about industrial energy costs that are not just damaging the steel industry, they're damaging many other industries and our basis on which to compete. And there is no point securing what the Secretary of State thinks is the national interest in terms of one particular steel manufacturer in one particular location if the unintended or otherwise foreseeable consequence is to ship very large parts of our high-end automotive manufacturing, our engineering, defence industries offshore, so that that is lost forever and conducted in other countries. And that is a very serious point that I would ask the Minister, he knows I've raised it with him, ask him to address that elsewhere. I'll give way if he's on this particular point.
Giving way. I'm afraid I want to give him another chance to answer the question from my constituency neighbour, which was not about the prospect of a future EAF on Teesside, which I support, but which I understand the Leader of the Opposition has confirmed from the dispatch box was not as advanced as he claims. It was about the crash closure of the blast furnace at Redcar in 2015, which ripped 3,000 jobs out of our region. What message does he have for the people of Redcar, whose government he was in when that happened?
Well, I'm afraid he ought to look again at the calendar, because not only was I not in government, I wasn't in this house, I wasn't in this place. What I was doing is getting on and trying to help in business grow the British economy. And when the same issue arose in Port Talbot, it was the previous government, indeed my honourable friend who's now the Leader of the Opposition, who took action, was willing to invest, was willing to back the private sector owner to secure the future of steelmaking in Port Talbot in Wales. That was our approach. That was what we did in government. So we talked about the issue of tariffs, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I hope, because it is intrinsically related to the idea that the government would take ownership, the taxpayer would take ownership of one particular participant in a complex industry supply chain. Now, I know, particularly on the benches opposite, some of the truths that we share today may not be immediately popular, but past governments failed because they were happy to do what's popular in the moment and not look at the long term and the consequences of that. The truth is, we should not be sitting here today nationalising British Steel, and certainly not with the bill in the form it is today. Points made by my honourable friend about the sweeping nature of its clauses, notwithstanding whatever we think about the intentions of the current Secretary of State. We have demonstrated in the past, and will do so again, that there are other options to partner with private sector and negotiate a better deal. We will fix the cause, not the symptoms, and we would save steelmaking in this country, but not through state-quick fixes, but by fixing the state itself. We won't pit industries against each other, as Labour are now doing. We wouldn't sit idly by for a rerun of the 1970s horror show which Labour made Britain sit through the last time round. I beg to move our reasoned amendment.
The original question was that the bill be now read a second time, since which an amendment is being proposed as on the order paper. The question is that the amendment be made. And I now call the Chair of the Select Committee with a 6-minute time limit, Liam Byrne.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'll be very quick because I know colleagues are keen to get in.
I'm going to speak against the amendment and in support of the bill for the simple reason that a speech as the one we've just heard from the Shadow Minister may just about have cut the mustard 5 or 6 years ago. It certainly doesn't work today in a world of weaponised interdependence. It doesn't work in a world where President Trump is back in the White House. It doesn't work when President Xi is prosecuting the 6th five-year plan as he is. And so the critical point in this debate that the Secretary of State made very well is that we have got to have a sovereign capability to make steel. We cannot afford, in today's world, to have a critical steelmaker like British Steel in the hands of a Chinese firm. We cannot, as Ronald Reagan once said, be innocents abroad in a world, frankly, that is no longer innocent. Now, regardless of those remarks, there are a couple of points where I think the Shadow Minister made some important points. And in a way, what I want to stress, Madam Deputy Speaker, is that although the Secretary of State is proposing some perhaps welcome statism, actually what he mustn't forget is the statecraft that is needed to make a success of this bill. There are 6 areas that I would like him to respond to very briefly, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I hope there is a cross-party consensus that we can strike around that. First, it is important that he wills the means and not simply the ends. We have, as the Shadow Minister said, already spent a lot of money on this. The transition to electric arc furnaces that the Secretary of State is proposing is not cheap, it is extremely expensive. And yet, I think we're hoping that a lot of that money is going to come from the National Wealth Fund, but he does not control the National Wealth Fund. He does not control the allocations that it makes. The National Wealth Fund has not said anything about guaranteeing money for the kinds of ends that the Secretary of State has, and the government has declined to explain what will happen if steel projects are not funded by the National Wealth Fund. So we do need a bit more clarity about where the kind of investment resources are going to come from for the Secretary of State's plans. Of course.
I'm grateful to the right honourable gentleman for giving way. Would he agree with me that it's unlikely that the Wealth Fund would wish to invest in British steelmaking, or indeed anyone would wish to invest in British steelmaking, whilst our electricity prices are so very high? And would he agree with me that there's no point in this bill until we fix the electricity market in this country?
Excellent point that I'm about to come on to. My point, I suppose, is that I think there is a case for this bill. I think the bill is actually quite important and the powers that it confers are important. But if we are to get value for money from it, then actually there's got to be 5 other components, which I will come on to now. The first of those is lower energy costs. The BICS scheme is welcome, but of course it doesn't come online until 2027. And steelmakers, as well as much of our manufacturing industry, is saying very clearly to us as a committee that there is now obviously a widening gap between UK wholesale electricity prices and those of our peers in the wake of the Iran crisis. And so my second question to the Minister is what further targeted support is going to be available to energy-intensive industries before 2027? Because, as the Honourable Member quite rightly points out, that is an essential component of the package. The third area that the Shadow Minister was right to highlight is this issue of tariffs. This is now an urgent issue. We have heard evidence this afternoon in our own roundtable on the committee about the need to refine the tariff structures that have been put in place. But the key thing is we get a better deal with the European Union. The European Union, home to 80% of our steel exports, is about to cut tariff-free quotas by 47%, double tariffs from 25% to 50%, and impose melt and pour requirements. Unless we can get a deal in place with the European Union before the end of July, then much of the good intentions behind this bill, I'm afraid, will be confounded. Third, procurement. We have got to now ensure there is a proper demand curve from the UK state for the things that British Steel makes. British procurement from the state is £1.06 in the British economy. We do not have right now, despite the excellent changes of the Procurement Act, a clear enough forward pipeline. That has to change, not least because when we talk to defence companies, who are of course patiently waiting the defence investment plan, when we talk to defence contractors, they still tell us that the kind of steel that they need to make the things that keep us safe as a country are not made in this country. And so making sure that there are advanced market commitments alongside the defence equipment plan, along with the range of other big long-term ambitions that I know the Secretary of State has, is very, very important. The penultimate area I want to raise, Madam Deputy Speaker, is then on scrap supply. So the Secretary of State has, I think,
ultimately come to the conclusion, wisely I suspect, to shift onto electric arc furnaces. That kind of industry model is only going to work if there is a healthy supply of scrap. I think that government ministers are being just a tiny bit too complacent about whether we have got the plans in place to source all of that scrap. I know there is a roundtable proposed for later this month, but can I ask, therefore, at the very least, that there is a readout for Parliament about what scrap supplies will be kept in our country rather than exported as part and parcel of ensuring the steel strategy actually works. The final point that I wanted to flag, Madam Deputy Speaker, is then about consolidation. I think one of the virtues of this Act is that it does actually bestow on the Secretary of State the power to actually ensure that there is consolidation in the UK steel industry around the future needs of the economy. And in particular, it should allow us to include in that taking assets that have gone into firms which are currently just gone out of business, for example, and actually rationalise the industry in a way that makes sense. But I would like to hear a bit more about exactly what the Secretary of State is proposing when it comes to consolidating the industry. Ultimately, Madam Deputy Speaker, in the world that we're in, when there are so many visible hands in the global economy interfering with the free market in steel, we are going to have a stronger visible hand. That is what the Secretary of State is proposing to take in this bill. There is a lot more work to do, I think, in the subsequent debate to satisfy the House that he has got the statecraft as a package right behind this particular measure of statism, and I look forward to hearing some of those reassuring noises when the Minister winds up this debate.
Well done. Spokesperson Sarah Olney.
Speaker. Steelmaking is of vital strategic importance to the UK. We rely on it for essential parts of our national infrastructure: defence, transport, clean energy generation, advanced manufacturing. It creates tens of thousands of high-skilled jobs across the country, helping to power our economy and boost our local communities. But for too long, our steel industry has been neglected. The last Conservative government oversaw a string of near collapses and last-minute rescues. They scrapped the industrial strategy, which is so vital to our manufacturers, and they erected new trade barriers, making it harder for our steel producers to do business with their biggest export market across the Channel. We have a duty to stand by this vital sector, especially as it navigates unprecedented challenges, including President Trump's unfair steel tariffs, China's anti-competitive state aid practices, and the transition to environmentally sustainable production methods. If we are going to foster a thriving steel industry, we cannot allow more producers to collapse, more jobs to be lost, or the risk of our last blast furnaces going cold. So we on these benches broadly welcome this legislation as a temporary, emergency and targeted step aimed specifically at turning around British steel before it can be returned to the private sector. And we note that it is in this spirit that British steel producers also support this measure. The Liberal Democrats are clear that our country needs a vibrant, privately run steel industry. The sector can only be powered forward in the long term by private enterprise, not by government ministers. So we will be closely scrutinising these measures and indeed the government's broader steel strategy to ensure that they move us in that direction. We need to move on from a patchwork of last-minute rescues to a long-term plan that will set the industry on a truly sustainable footing. So right from the get-go, we would have liked to have seen plans to find private co-investors who can help modernise the sites and create jobs. Putin's barbaric war in Europe threatens our national security. Donald Trump's reckless tariffs are undermining our economy, and the continuing conflict in the Middle East threatens business supply chains. All of these factors make the future of reliable domestic steel production more important than ever for whole swathes of our economy, which is why the government should ensure that industries that rely on steel, such as defence, are represented and involved in decision-making relating to this legislation. We also need to see stronger action from the government on improved trade with the EU so that our steel exporters can benefit from easier access to their biggest market and that our manufacturers get easier and cheaper access to the materials they need. A new UK-EU customs union would be hugely beneficial in that respect. And last but not least, we need more ambition on the use of UK-made steel within our domestic market. We welcome the government's target of boosting domestic production from 30% to 50% of UK steel demand, although there's no clear timeline for this. And we can't help but note the equivalent target in the EU is 75%. And while we understand the difference between the two markets, we hope that the government will keep the target under review in light of uncertain supply chains and consider further incentives for the use of UK-made steel in private sector projects. The Liberal Democrats know that nationalising steel producers is not the answer in the long term. And I would ask the Minister if they could confirm that government also views this as an interim rescue measure. I'd like to ask the Minister what specific steps they are planning to take in order to ensure that British steel becomes investable for the private sector should this legislation be triggered. And as the bill progresses through this House, the Liberal Democrats will be carefully scrutinising the use of secondary legislation with the aim of maximising accountability. Many of the measures in this bill will be implemented with negative resolution procedures, and I hope the Minister would agree the affirmative procedure would offer more meaningful parliamentary engagement. I'd urge the Government to ensure that Parliament is given proper transparency over costs associated with this legislation. Clauses 53 and 54 set out the process for the valuation of relevant businesses and the calculation of any compensation that might be paid to previous owners. And while we understand that valuations will depend on factors specific to each business, the Government should publish detailed information about the criteria taken into account and must ensure that Parliament will be given the opportunity to scrutinise proposed valuations and compensation amounts. And I'd ask the Minister whether they've considered granting powers to the Business and Trade Select Committee to scrutinise spending on these measures. Lastly, I'd like to ask the Minister if they will update the House on whether and to what extent this legislation will impact employee pension schemes and what conversations have been had with the pensions regulator to that effect. Looking at the broader state of the steel sector, from the 1st of July this year, the Government's new UK steel and trade measure will impose tariffs on imported steel. And while we understand the need to temporarily bring in such protections due to the disruption caused by US steel tariffs and cheap subsidised Chinese exports, this measure will have a significant impact on manufacturers who depend on steel as a key business input. My honourable friend for Harpenden and Berkhamsted raised this morning in DBT questions about a firm in her constituency, Dynamic Metals, which is facing a bill of approximately £3 million to import the specialist steel grades that they require for their services. And I welcome the Government's aim to encourage domestic production and the purchase of steel from UK steel companies. Some specific grades of steel are not domestically produced, and therefore the Government is harming the purchasing powers of UK businesses. So will the Government commit to re-examining the application of tariffs on certain grades of steel to ensure that they do not inadvertently damage domestic buyers? It is important to note that the measures in this bill are subject to a public interest test, but there are limited details about what this test will involve. Will the Minister allow Parliament to scrutinise the criteria for the public interest test and publish a detailed report setting out why they believe they have been met? How will the Minister ensure that the aim to protect vital infrastructure and manufacturing sectors is balanced with sustainable energy commitments? And will they confirm that Jingyi is financially responsible for any environmental damage caused when calculating compensation? What considerations will be made for the effective workforce to ensure that jobs and skills are protected? The Government is right to be taking action to protect British steel, but nationalisation must be a temporary step to rescue businesses before they can be returned to the private sector. We are supportive of the Government's pace and urgency in action to assist the steel industry, but we need more details on the longer-term vision, and I'd be grateful if the Minister could outline in his response the reassurances that I've asked for in my speech, which includes how will the Government ensure that the steel industry becomes investable for the private sector following nationalisation? How will Parliament have oversight once the powers in this bill are triggered? And how will Parliament be provided with transparency regarding the costs associated with nationalisation? Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker.
With a 5-minute time limit, Jessica Morden. Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I very much welcome this bill to give the Government new powers to intervene in the steel industry where it's in the public interest to do it. And I welcome it because over many years, alongside many other steel MPs, we've relentlessly made the point that the steel industry is of the utmost importance, strategic importance to this country, for our economy, for our security, and we must do all that we can to protect and to cherish it. So, whilst the focus of the legislation today is on the future of British steel, and I very much pay tribute to the efforts and the advocacy, fantastic advocacy, from the Honourable Member for Scunthorpe, we do know that it also sends a clear signal about the Government's commitments to the industry and workers as a whole. As the Ministers know, steel is very important to my constituency in Newport East, both at Tatas, Llanwern and Severn Steel too, and I know the Steel Minister met with representatives from Llanwern this week, and I pay tribute also to the steel unions, like my honourable friend earlier, particularly Community and GMB, which I'm a member of, and also Reg Guttridge, who's the newly elected National Chair of Community Union, and I know will be an excellent advocate. My asks really are, I completely understand the significant funding had to be made to help keep British steel in Scunthorpe open, but it's also really, really important that producers and steelworkers in Wales get their share of the government's billions of pounds of investment through the National Welsh Fund, funds to invest in other sites such as Llanwern, and it's also really important that ministers talk to Tata to urge them to follow through on the future investments they've previously talked about, including in Llanwern. I really welcome the steel strategy, the first time we've ever had, when the party opposite had 14 years to set up a strategy and didn't. Exactly. And we had this revolving door of steel ministers continuously, and I'm afraid their woeful approach and the amendment today just continues that approach. Our approach is a real roadmap for the future. I welcome the new import quota and tariff levels to cut the amount of foreign-made steel coming in to protect us from global oversupply, but there are concerns, as others have mentioned, that downstream plants the import quotas for galvanised steel and hollow sections allow too much leniency for highly subsidised products from non-EU countries to come into the UK market and undercut manufacturers such as at Llanwern. So I really ask the Minister to look at that. Ministers will also be aware of the industry's concern about the timing and design of UK CBAM, so I'd be really keen to hear more about that. And on procurement, like my honourable friend said, we're doing great work on procurement, and it's a big part of the steel strategy. But I am aware from Severn Steel, who can, have proved over and over again they can supply high-quality products for HS2, but are still seeing some contracts for foreign-made steel being made. So please can we check into that and raise it with HS2 too. Energy is always an issue, with our underlying costs still far more expensive than our European rivals. So can I join others in saying, can we have further look at more targeted support? So that's a view asked from me today, but I very much welcome the bill today and clearly the direction of travel that this government has on steel. And can I end by also recognising and acknowledging the deep industry expertise and knowledge that this steel minister brings to the job. It's recognised in our plants, and it's hugely refreshing after the last government.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I do not support this bill, and I believe that the reason amendment is the right way forward, that I will clearly set out now of the devastating impact this is real-time about to have in my constituency. We have a great local business called Amadil, who is a British-run family business. They started with a couple of people in 1976 in Clibbury, Mortimer, South Shropshire. Now, I've recently been to Clibbury to meet with Paul, Chris, Ben and the team, as well as Rob Cooper from the British Stainless Steel Association. And this business was founded by Paul Slingsby, who at 75 is still working in the business today. And they are the UK's largest privately owned supplier and stockholder of stainless steel long products, with over 1,200 customers, about 20% of the UK's market. They know what they're on about. And when this announcement on tariffs was announced, they were completely blindsided. They had not been told, and none of their customers or suppliers or people they were involved with knew anything about this. They came straight to me. I've written to the Minister multiple times. I've had one response, but they need to sit down. The Minister needs to sit down with the largest British business in this industry and have a serious conversation. Because at the moment, the big issues that they're facing is the tariffs that cover the stainless steel products, and they bring in products that cannot be made in the UK. There is not enough quantity or type. Currently, at the moment, you cannot get them. And the government wants to protect steel industry of vital strategic importance. I get that. They also want to protect jobs. But for almost 1,000 jobs they will save, there is many more thousands that will be lost. And I'll say exactly where. The UK cannot meet domestic market demands, and a huge gap will be created. Businesses like Amadil will be forced to import. Tariffs will drive up costs by 50%. The cash is not there across the industry to be able to absorb these extra costs without mass redundancies. These costs will then be passed on, meaning the manufacturer costs will go up. What happens then? The customer will buy the finished product from manufacturers overseas at a lower price. And these products are not then subject to tariffs. It's not levelling the playing field for us. And the UK, as I said, doesn't produce enough stainless steel of the right type or quality to meet demand. Now, Armadale currently have 5,000 tonnes of stainless steel in stock as it stands today. 2,000 tonnes of that, and I repeat, 2,000 tonnes is stock that cannot and is not made in the UK. And it could, to get some of these skills right, take up to 15 years to do. Large diameter bars of certain grades are not made in the UK. And these bars are vital to key industries like aerospace, defence, pharmaceuticals, oil, automotive, general engineering, and many more. So if the tariffs are putting on these businesses, they are literally going to be priced out of the industry. And this is the largest British business in the UK in this field. There are many, many others. So I really hope the Secretary of State can see the importance of this. And what I've said is I believe, briefly.
I'll save him from driving home the point even greater, because I understand the passion with which he's speaking. The company he's referring to, Armadale, I will look into this personally. The intentions of the measures that I brought in is to protect domestic production and the possibility of domestic production. It is not in order to prevent goods that we do not make here and do not intend to have the capacity to make here to suffer. So if there is a specific issue, I will look into this, because I do not want negative impacts from downstream for which are not, and we don't have the capacity to produce here. The Trade Minister said earlier that he would look into this as well. Us as a team, we will look into these issues.
Secretary of State for saying that, and I will follow up personally with him, with Armadale, if we can talk on a way forward, because I actually said to Armadale, I believe this is an unintended consequence of what the government are trying to do, and once I point this out clearly, there will be a way forward to look at it. And the long and the short of it, I'll put my speech to one side, is there's a certain size of rod that only the UK can make. When it gets past that size, and I was watching that at their facility a few weeks ago, it is not made in this country, but it is needed by so many of those critical industries. And where you're looking at the steel as a whole, it's just this one part of the stainless steel industry. And if the Secretary of State or one of the ministers was to sit with me and the team at Armadale, they will be able to see within a matter of minutes where this gap is and how to plug it. And it's along the blanket sort of grading for all of these bars. But I request that there can be just a pause for, say, 6 months, sit down, or if in a matter of days can be talking with Armadale to look at this, because there is a massive knock-on impact that is seriously going to hurt the stainless steel industry, and what is one of the largest employers in my constituency is going to be massively hurt by this.
And with a 3-minute time limit, that will get most, but not all members in. Andy MacDonald.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I warmly welcome this bill and the action the government is taking to protect Britain's steel industry. I congratulate the Minister, the member for Stockton North, for the sterling work he's done in bringing this legislation before the House. Steel manufacturing is a strategic national asset. It underpins our infrastructure, transport system, energy, security, defence capability and industrial future. It is too important to be left entirely to the private sector. For many of us representing industrial communities, this debate is deeply personal. On Teesside, iron and steel built towns, livelihoods and identities from the early 19th century onwards. Generations of skilled workers helped forge modern Britain with Teesside steel. And as Chris Rea said, the ships and bridges, they were all delivered from Sydney Harbour to the Cisco Bay. But over the decades, those industries were systematically weakened. The deindustrialisation of the 1980s and 90s hollowed out communities across the north and across Britain. And then in 2015, the Conservative government allowed the Redcar Steelworks to close, with devastating consequences for 3,000 workers, families and a further 6,000 in the wider Teesside economy. Whereas in Ilva, the Taranto plant, the Italians intervened to save that plant. The French did at Florange, but this government, previous government sat on its hands. The truth is that a different choice could have been made then in Redcar, just as a different choice is being made now. The government could have intervened back in the day to preserve strategic industrial capability. This bill signals something very important. A government once again willing to play an active role in shaping industry and growing the economy, and it does so pragmatically. It creates a framework for the state to step in when markets fail to protect industries of strategic national importance. It allows intervention, including public ownership where necessary, when the loss of industrial capacity would damage the national interest. It is common sense. People understand there are sectors where the public interest must become before narrow private gain. We've already seen this government adopt new models of public intervention elsewhere. But we need a serious strategy for reindustrialisation and growth. That means backing British business through a strong public procurement strategy, delivering a long-term pipeline of orders. If public money is funding railway, schools and hospitals, etc., then wherever possible, the steel for those projects should be made here in Britain by British workers.
David Chadwick.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I'd like to start this contribution on a positive note for the steel industry. Last week, I visited Kiernan Steel's fabrication workshop in Llandrindod-Wells. Kiernan Steel is a tremendously successful Irish company that has brought much-needed jobs to Radnorshire, and their success shows how the rural economy can prosper if our businesses are encouraged and enabled to locate. One thing that there's no shortage of in mid-Wales is land, and if we make that land available to businesses that need it, they will create the jobs our region and our economy needs. The steel industry is critical to our wider economy. It's virtually impossible to build anything without steel. But the steel industry does require a skilled workforce, and I was encouraged by some of the comments that the Secretary of State made about the skills shortages, because that's something that we're seriously lacking in. There are thousands of vacancies for welders alone. Their pay is shooting up because of those shortages, and those skill shortages throughout the steel industry are therefore pushing up the price of building anything, particularly delivering infrastructure. And that's why the health of our steel industry matters. Without looking after it, we will see the costs for projects like HS2 and the cost of delivering all of the housing that we need continuing to mount. Yes, of course.
To my honourable friend for taking intervention. I was interested in the comment about the shortage of welders. Would he agree with me that the government's plan for construction colleges of excellence, including the one in my constituent, Bury St Edmunds, will be crucial for the provision of welders?
There are 6,000 vacancies at least for welders, so absolutely we need a lot more of them. Those skill shortages present opportunities to get future generations into well-paid and secure trades. AI cannot do welding yet because it doesn't have any arms yet. Our education system is not producing the skills that our economy needs, and our economy is suffering from that failure. Steel is strategic, it's part of our sovereign capability, and it's part of British power. That's why steel matters. The steel industry, as has already been mentioned today, is affected by the geopolitical tensions that are so rampant across the world. Our steel industry has been hammered by the Chinese, who have flooded the international market with cheap Chinese steel and have run one of our biggest companies into the ground. China has wiped out our steel industry intentionally. Yet the Conservatives seem to be saying today that they don't think that the government should do anything about it. Just yesterday, they were complaining about our lack of defence readiness. Well, where do they think tanks and ships, what do they think they are made from? Madam Deputy Speaker, today this government asks Parliament to move heaven and earth to save steel in Scunthorpe, and it's right to act. Of course the government should have these proposed powers. But people in Wales are asking one simple question today. Where was this bill in July 2024 when the blast furnaces at Port Talbot were switched off for the last time? When Welsh communities were crying out for help, Westminster shrugged its shoulders. And that was despite Welsh Labour MPs and candidates lining up in front of giant election posters saying, "Save our steel," in the months prior to the general election. They said that they had a £2.5 billion fund for spending on steel. And given that the government has admitted to spending £1.3 million a day to keep the Scunthorpe plant going, how much of that fund is left to spend in Wales? If protecting primary steel production is so important, why did they allow the biggest steelworks in Britain to be turned off? Welsh workers were told that there was nothing that could be done. People in my constituency have lost their jobs because of this. When 2,800 jobs were wiped out in Port Talbot, there was no emergency Saturday sitting, no recall of Parliament, no emergency legislation, and no sudden declaration that steel was a vital national interest.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'd like to start by paying tribute to my friend, the Honourable Member for Scunthorpe, my Northern Lincolnshire neighbour, long-time champion and campaigner to protect and secure the future of Scunthorpe Steelworks, which is essential to the fabric of the town and a critical part of its identity. The government is right to be taking the steps needed to bring British Steel back into public ownership. Having our own sovereign steel-making capacity is crucial to ensure the UK's defence and infrastructure security. Jingye have failed as custodians of British Steel in Scunthorpe. They've had the opportunity to do the decent thing and come to an agreement before the government are forced to use the powers in this bill, and we will wait to see whether they do indeed do that. I know that the Minister has a deep understanding of iron and steel making, and I'm sure that he will agree with me that resolving the ownership of British Steel will allow an ambitious future for the business to be realised. It will allow a plan to be brought forward, and that will attract investment. The UK management and workforce at British Steel have been working in an impossible situation while the government have been negotiating with the current owners. And I hope that the current leadership will be empowered by the government so that they can make the necessary decisions to deliver the positive future for the business that the town really deserves. The trade unions, Community, Unite and GMB have worked consistently hard to keep steel making in the UK, and I wonder if the Minister could take the opportunity to confirm that both management and the trade unions will be enabled by the action being taken today to deliver the positive future that everybody really wants to see for steel making in the UK broadly. Scunthorpe is home to one of the last very large pieces of industrial land in the UK, and the proper development of this land could develop not just Scunthorpe or indeed my constituency, but the whole of the UK. The Minister needs to set out what plans he has to work with North Lincolnshire Local Authority and other partners to make the most of those opportunities, because what we don't want to see is a first-come, first-serve situation where perhaps the best users and custodians of that land are not given the opportunity to take on that land, because it has to be the right company who will ensure that the proud history of manufacturing in Northern Lincolnshire continues long into the future. And will the Minister please confirm that that will be his approach as we look to the future?
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Well, it's exactly 7 years since I've been calling for taking British Steel at Scunthorpe into public ownership. The Conservatives rejected my splendid advice, and the chaos that we've seen here as a result of that. And in opposing this bill, they show that actually they don't care about the sovereign nature and importance of steelmaking. They don't care about the thousands of highly skilled jobs, and they don't care about the communities and the families around them. They have no understanding of its importance. And I congratulate the Secretary of State and the Minister of State for bringing this forward as the first bill in this new King's Speech. I did say to his predecessor that he should show some cojones and get on with it. And I think that is what we are now seeing. But alongside this support from us, Secretary of State, what I would say is we now need to see the vision. We now need to see the plan and how it is for the long term. And I'm concerned that there's a sort of little quiet, we'll quietly let the blast furnaces just disappear, go cold, and replace it with an electric arc furnace. We need a big, bold vision to renew, reline, rebuild at least one blast furnace. Around the world, honourable members, 50% of all new steel-making capacity in the last 5 years is blast furnaces. It is the strongest, most robust primary steel. I know the Minister of State is a great fan of direct reduced iron, and he has a point there. But nevertheless, we should not expose ourselves to putting all of our bets on electric arc furnaces when we know that the price of electricity is at a crisis high level. We need diversity in this. Rather like my late grandmother, when she looked at the desserts available for Sunday lunch, she said, "Grandson, have a little bit of each." And I believe, with regard to steelmaking, let's have, Madam Deputy Speaker, let's have a little bit of each. Let's have a bit of primary steel and let's have a little bit of electric arc furnace steel to ensure that we always retain the skills and the importance of the sovereign steel-making capability. So I hope that the Minister and the Secretary of State will produce that vision, that plan, over the coming weeks, so that we can have confidence and that the jobs and the communities can have confidence that steel-making will be retained and invested in for the long term.
Speaker. I represent a constituency built around steel and manufacturing, now home to Tata Steel's processing and distribution centre, the largest in the UK. In Wolverhampton and Willenhall, steel is our history, it's our identity, and with the actions taken by this government, I sincerely believe it will continue to be our future too. The Steel Nationalisation Bill marks a serious and necessary step towards safeguarding the long-term future of the UK steel industry. It gives the government the power to bring steel companies, including British Steel, into public ownership where it is in the public interest to do so. This is safeguarding Britain's steel capability and capacity, which is firmly in the national interest, protecting jobs and our communities. And that matters profoundly to places like mine. I'm calling for British procurement as well, so British-made steel is used to build our railways, infrastructure and wind turbines, so national renewal runs through communities like Wolverhampton North East, through the skills of our workers, the strength of our industries and future based on good, secure jobs and apprenticeships. I also sincerely believe that this decisive action would not have been taken under the approach we saw from the previous Conservative government. Since 2010, we've seen a litany of missed chances and, in my opinion, moral failures. That is why it is welcome that this bill reflects the seriousness with which we treat domestic steel production and the communities that depend upon it. And that certainty is being recognised by the industry. As UK Steel has said, this provides vital reassurance for workers, customers and supply chains at a critical moment, recognising steel as a strategic national asset, essential to economic growth, national security and resilience. I also support the ambition of the government to boost domestic production from 30% to 50%. However, I do ask the Minister to look at tariffs on imported steel, but using evidence-based discussions on specific codes and engage with downstream firms who are concerned about the measures. Madam Deputy Speaker, in Wolverhampton, Willenhall and across the Black Country, we understand what steel represents. We understand the value of secure, well-paid, skilled work. So for our workers, our apprentices, our supply chains and for the long-term strength of the United Kingdom, I support this bill and commend it to the House.
Terrible. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Now, in March of this year, the government released its steel strategy, which was talking about taking bold steps to help grow the industry. And the bold steps that we have in front of us, granting powers to nationalise an industry and, in 6 weeks' time, introducing a 50% tariff on the imports of steel products that can also be made in the UK. And I come back to this because it is a really, really important point. Now, it does sound admirable to protect British steel, I completely understand that, but it is a decision that has been made without consultation with the industry. Because if they had consulted with the industry, then I wouldn't have had to meet with my constituent, Alec Bailey, last week, who was absolutely desperate about the prospects of his future business. A business which employs 70 people with a 35 million turnover. He owns Dynamic Metals, which is one of the UK's largest independent stockists of aerospace high-grade metals, which are obviously very specialist steels tested to high standards to be suitable for use in aircraft. Now, the issue he faces deals on 3 particular product types, which is 12A, 14 and 27. I'll spare everyone the further details. But firstly, I'll give you some more. I'll write to the Minister for sure. Firstly, none of this can be realistically made in the UK. The government has provided a list of potential suppliers, but the majority of those, including British Steel, only make commercial, not aerospace-grade steel. And the only one that might is SS UK, which is currently in liquidation. Secondly, due to the way that the legislation has been drafted, as Alex explained to me, there is no way that customs will be able to differentiate between a generic steel and a specialist steel, as they use the same HS codes upon import. So this really needs to be revisited. And thirdly, the level of the quotas set is far too low. Product 12A is subject to a 31% reduction in the quota allowance, and now there is a tiny quota being introduced for 14 and 27, where there was no quota before. All in all, Alex has no option to be able to meet his order book requirements, but to incur these tariffs. And the additional burden that he's going to have to pick up on the 1st of July, £3.2 million. He will be bankrupt within 6 months if this measure goes ahead. And he is not alone, as we have heard in this House. Hundreds of businesses are in the same position. As Alex said, this is a classic example of legislation which has been written with noble intentions to save the UK steel industry, but due to a lack of consultation, lack of industry knowledge by the authors, and a total misunderstanding of the knock-on effects, the single piece of legislation will kill steel stockholding and manufacture in the UK. So can I ask, perhaps, that when the Secretary of State is looking into the case raised by the member for South Shropshire, he might also meet with Dynamic Metals? Because without prompt action now, they will run to much more significant issues down the line come the 1st of July.
I warmly welcome the government's decision to move towards the nationalisation of British Steel. It is the right decision for our economy, the right decision for industrial communities, and the right decision for Britain's national security. And I say that as somebody who does believe in the value of enterprise, competition, and a strong private sector. But there are clear cases where privatisation has failed the national interest and where government has not only the right to intervene, but a duty to do so. And particularly in cases where you're dealing with a foundational industry that is foreign-owned. I was stunned that the front bench of the Conservative Party, when asked a straight question whether they would prefer British steel to be in the hands of the Chinese or the British, they couldn't simply answer the British. They avoided the question. It's staggering disregard for our country's national security, because steel is not just another commodity. It's fundamental to our national sovereignty. It underpins our defence industry, our infrastructure, our energy sector, our manufacturing base. A nation that cannot produce its own steel leaves itself vulnerable, dependent on the decisions, priorities and interests of others. We have moved into a different era, and listening to some of the contributions opposite, you would believe we were still in the 1990s. Globalisation is dead, and to be honest, I welcome its death, because all it ever did was leave working class communities like mine behind, ripping out the heart of industrial communities like Hartlepool. But the tragedy is we still in this country import 68% of our steel needs. That is a tragedy that we must fix. Because if public money, if British taxpayers' money is to be spent, then British industry must benefit. If we're building British warships, British steel should be used. If Britain is building offshore wind farms, then British steel should be used. If we're building new nuclear, as we are in Hartlepool, thanks to the deal we struck last year in September, then it is British steel that should be used. So we must, and this is my biggest plea to the front bench, we must radically reform procurement policy in this country. I welcome the steel tariffs that are being put in place and the assurances by the Secretary of State that he will look carefully at those individual cases. But we must put our country first. This bill is critical to doing that and protecting working class communities that I represent. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Speaker. And
It probably won't come as a surprise to members opposite, but I fundamentally disagree with the last speaker. I appreciated his passion, but I fundamentally disagree with his, because I'm proud that we're the only party in this House. I know the Secretary of State's getting a bit excited there. I'm going to come to him in a minute on tariffs, but I'll say we're the only party in this House objecting to this bill for the right reasons, because the Secretary of State repeatedly talked about making this country stronger. I don't think this bill does that. I think by nationalising, I just do not think government can run businesses. Certainly, you know, I say no disrespect, but certainly not that with the front bench that we've got at the moment in the government. And actually, I just think they will create inefficiencies, push up prices, and actually it will be the taxpayer that ends up stomaching the cost of that. So this does not make us stronger, it makes us weaker. And actually, the honourable member that just before me said we're taking it back to the 1990s, I think this government is taking us back to the 1970s by pushing up those costs and lumbering the taxpayer, and hopefully a future Conservative government will have to unwind some of the real harm that will come to fruition. And of course, no one opposite can tell us where will this nationalisation stop. Will it be ceramics tomorrow? What will happen? Which industries will they pick and choose? But let me come on to the issue of tariffs in the limited time that I have, because I was also visited, like my honourable friend earlier, by a constituent, about all the honourable friends who've raised this, by Peter Watson of Davicon. And I've written to the Secretary of State about this, and it was only last week, so I respect that he may not have had time to come back to me, but I hope he does. It's the UK's leading mezzanine manufacturer, and the briefing that he put in front of me as a result of the tariffs and the quota reduction. So on merchant bars, it's a reduction of almost 97% and an increase of 50% in quotas. And for all the best of intention, or for whatever he wants to achieve, the reality is industry and markets do not work to the whims of government. They will not move quick enough to do that, and that will push up prices. In fact, the briefing I saw will mean that there will be an almost doubling of quota of per tonnage steel by the 1st of July. That is a cost that will have to be borne by industry. That is a cost that will have to be borne by taxpayers, because if we're talking about nuclear power plant creation or HS2, of course those are taxpayer-funded projects that will have to bear those costs. And I would say to the Secretary of State, I was listening to the Prime Minister yesterday at PMQs, it's clear that they obviously recognise there's an issue coming down the track. I would argue this should have been anticipated before the tariffs had come into place. But look, we are where we are. So I've written to the Secretary of State. I really would welcome some serious action on this. I know my honourable friend made a really eloquent argument about a delay in introduction on that. If that's not going to happen, he's shaking his head, if that's not going to happen, then let's look at those HS codes. But he does need to recognise that there's going to be a serious impact on steel industry and also the peripheral industries that rely on the steel manufacturing in this country.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Steel is what Yorkshire tea and Yorkshire puds are to God's own county, what the hot pot is to Lancashire and what black cabs are to London, what the ledger is to Doncaster and what the hood is to Haxey. It's about us, it's about what makes us, it's about what drives us, it's about pride. British steel is at the heart of the UK's industrial heritage, was the backbone of the Industrial Revolution, driving global infrastructure and enabling military preeminence. It was key to our rail, maritime defence and major capital infrastructure. Someone said to me this week, there is history that's been made, but more importantly, there is history that we can still make, and we need to make it right now, right here, with British Steel. The future of British Steel matters not only to my neighbouring area of Scunthorpe, but to communities across North Lincolnshire, South Yorkshire and beyond, including people in my own constituency of Doncaster East and the Isle of Axholme, some who work at Scunthorpe, and all of whom are deeply affected by the fortunes of a major local industry. The steel workers at Scunthorpe are doing work that is essential to this country. It's highly skilled, technical and sometimes dangerous work. They deserve respect for what they do, and they deserve certainty about the future of the industry they have helped to sustain. That is why the bill before the House is so important. And whilst my interest is local, the issue is absolutely national. By nationalising steel, we can ensure the UK does not become the only G7 country incapable of producing its own primary steel, stopping reliance on foreign imports. This is not nostalgia for the past. It's not about keeping an industry going just for sentimental reasons. It's about recognising that steel is a strategic national asset. If Britain is to build the homes, railways, energy infrastructure and the defence capability that we need, then Britain needs steel. If we're serious about industrial resilience, national security, economic growth, then we cannot be indifferent to whether we retain the capacity to make steel here at home. The steelworks at Scunthorpe are not just another private asset on a balance sheet. They are a vital part of our industrial base. Once that capacity is lost, it's not easily rebuilt, and once those skills are gone, they're not easily recovered. The government is right to bring forward legislation that gives the Secretary of State the powers needed to act where the public interest requires it. Public ownership should never be treated lightly, but nor should it be ruled out when a vital national industry is at risk. The test here is straightforward. Does Britain need steel? Yes. Does Britain need the skills and capacity represented at Scunthorpe? Yes. Would it be in the national interest to allow that capacity to disappear? No. That is why intervention is justified. For the workers at Scunthorpe, for the communities that depend on those jobs in my constituency, and for the future strength and resilience of our country, this bill deserves the support of this House.
Which brings us to the front bench contributions. Dame Harriet Baldwin.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. And this has been a really interesting debate because I think it's brought out on government benches the strategic love of nationalisation for the sake of nationalisation. And I think what we've tried to do in our reasoned amendment is put out a different approach. We also heard very clearly from Reform that they also are in favour of a nationalisation for the sake of nationalisation. And actually what we have in this bill, Madam Deputy Speaker, is something that is neither going to satisfy our camp or their camp, because in fact what we have here is a chaotic, unplanned, non-strategic journey which is ending up burning through taxpayers' money at every stage. We can see that the decisions that the government has taken since it came to power have actually delivered the worst of all possible worlds for this crucial industry. Now, I promised, Madam Deputy Speaker, that I wouldn't take any interventions in the interest of time. We've seen here an emergency intervention. It's one with mounting public costs, and those public costs have no clear limits for the taxpayer. And this legislation is certainly not going to put things on a secure footing. We were told this time last year, when we were brought in on a Saturday for the first time since the Falklands War, that nationalisation was not the plan. And yet the Prime Minister went to China with the Secretary of State and failed to secure a deal for British steel. And so we have this bill. It doesn't resolve any underlying issues. Instead, it just opens the door to an indefinite and infinite bill for the taxpayer. Not only that, Madam Deputy Speaker, but it's got a sunset clause in it, which, would you believe it, can be extended indefinitely. There are far too many unchecked powers in this bill. It doesn't address, as the chair of the Business and Trade Select Committee mentioned, that Britain has the highest energy prices in the developed world. And you can't have an industrial policy for steel unless you have an energy policy for industry. Now, in addition to the chair of the Select Committee, I think we had a very interesting speech from the Liberal Democrat spokesperson about how we could turn this into something that's temporary, emergency, and the path to returning this to the private sector. And then we heard powerful interventions from these benches, from my honourable friend from South Shropshire, my honourable friend from South Northamptonshire, and my honourable friend from Meriden, who spoke up very, very clearly for the businesses in their constituencies that are going to be so badly affected as of the 1st of June with an inflationary 50% tariff on imported steel. So really this afternoon is a chance for ministers to answer some questions. Why were the government unable to strike a deal with the Chinese owners? When exactly did the government decide that nationalisation was the right path? Did they decide it before the Special Measures Act was introduced? And if so, why was the House not told it at the time? Why should the taxpayer, Madam Deputy Speaker, be the one who foots this bill? How is this value for money for the taxpayer? Do we even know what the total cost is to the taxpayer from these ongoing losses, the capital investment, and the enormous liabilities? This bill commits the taxpayer to the ownership of an asset that loses hundreds of millions of pounds each year. So what assessment has the Minister made of the chilling impact the measures in this bill will have on other inward investors into the United Kingdom?
And what is his exit strategy, if he has one? If the government proposes to nationalise a steel company on the basis that it meets the public interest test, then can the Minister explain how, in the future, that same asset could ever be returned to the private ownership without contradicting their own public interest assessment that it's in the national interest? Or is the reality that once this threshold is crossed, the British taxpayers locked into permanently underwriting a loss-making asset with no timetable for it to return? And why is there no requirement in this bill, Madam Deputy Speaker, for a proper impact or value for money assessment before the Secretary of State exercises the powers? And why have the government not taken us up on our cheap power plan, which addresses one of the root causes of this sector's difficulties? And can the Minister commit urgently, and I think I heard him say it from a sedentary position, but I'd like to hear him say it again, urgently to look at the impact of these 50% steel tariffs on our steel manufacturing sector. So to conclude, Madam Deputy Speaker, this House should not be required this afternoon to sign off on a blank cheque. We cannot and we will not support legislation that appears to be nationalisation in search of a rationale, so I urge all colleagues to support our reasoned amendment.
Minister Chris MacDonald.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. You know, as I was preparing for the debate today, it struck me that 60 years ago this summer, this House was debating steel nationalisation, and the England team went on to win the World Cup, and we're back here discussing steel nationalisation again, so I have high hopes for the summer. But, you know, sometimes it is informative to learn a bit from the past, and if we go back to that steel nationalisation of 1966, the Minister of Power opened the debate and he said there is no manufacturing industry of such basic importance to the British economy. Of course, he was right then, and it's true now, but the steel industry isn't so good that you nationalise it twice. You nationalise it thrice, because, of course, the steel industry was also nationalised partly in 1948, and the Minister of Supply, when he moved the motion there, said, without steel, the life of Britain would collapse. And that is absolutely true, as well, as we've heard from the contributions of people in the House today. And as the Minister for Industry, part of my mission is to increase the productive capacity of our industry. And what we have seen in the steel industry, and what we saw particularly in the steel industry in the last 14 years of the Tories, was productive decline. They presided over the loss of great steel plants and also a reduction in the productive capacity of those steel plants. But the thing is, that decline in market share from 80% to 30% of market share wasn't inevitable. It was a choice born out of inaction, a choice born out of a lack of industrial policy. And the reason that this nationalisation bill is so important now is exactly the same as the reason it was important in 1966. There's been a great technological shift in the industry. Then it was continuous casting, now it is electric arc furnaces. The industry has been decapitalised by years of underinvestment. It needs to be recapitalised, and productivity has fallen off a cliff under the previous government. It fell repeatedly following the closure of the Redcar blast furnace, and productivity must be improved. These are not the words of someone who is wedded to some sort of socialist principle of nationalisation. These are the words of someone who spent his life in the steel industry, ran a business in the steel industry, and is dedicated to improving productivity in our industry. Now, I heard the words of the Shadow Minister when he launched the debate, and I have to say I was quite disappointed, because he and I met earlier this week, and my colleagues behind me might be surprised to find that he was very thoughtful and also very probing in the questions he asked me, and he raised some really interesting points, and we had a good discussion, and I thought about the points afterwards, and I thought that's really interesting that he's thought about those things that we will have to bear in mind when we pass this legislation. But then what's he done? He's fallen into his usual trap, their usual trap, of presenting this as an ideological debate, instead of a debate about the function of an industry that is vital to this country. And that is how they prosecuted this debate. But you see, I learned something when I was working in the industry, because 2 years ago I was running a business in the steel industry. 20 years ago I was working at the Scunthorpe Steelworks. More than 30 years ago, you won't believe it, more than 30 years ago, I left school and I got a job in the steel industry. And there were a lot of changes over that time. Sometimes I stayed in the same job, but the company changed. The sort of badge on your hard hat change, all of those sorts of things. When it changed from British Steel to Chorus as it was at the time, that was a big blow to people in terms of how they felt about it. But I'll tell you one thing I recognised. Ownership matters, and it makes a difference because strategy matters. It matters where the head office of the business is. People care about the local area where they work. Those things are important. And, do you know, those workers care, those communities care. We care, they don't care. That's quite clear to me.
I'll be very brief. I thank the Minister for his remarks. There is one ideological difference that he hasn't mentioned once, which is the huge gulf between our side and his party on energy. And you are not going to have a sustainable steel industry on energy.
Yes, you're right. There is a gulf there. They were in favour of some of the highest industrial energy prices in the world. We have delivered an increase in the supercharger benefit from 60% to 90%, the introduction of the British Industrial Competitiveness Scheme, and through our investments today in chemicals, in ceramics and of course in steel, we're supporting British industry with their operating costs on energy and their capital costs to improve their productivity as well. Now, steel communities, they are proud people. They are people who can stand on their own 2 feet, and they want to. They don't want subsidies. They've got pride. They've got dignity in their work. And as I saw when I went to the Corby Steelworks quite recently, the sacrifice of individuals and communities for their hard and dangerous labour as well. And that I will give way.
I thank the Minister for giving way, and he knows the sacrifices that have been made by my constituents at DL Plate Mill in Motherwell. Can I ask the Minister to confirm that this plate mill remains at the heart of the UK steel strategy and that the legislation that we have debated today provides a potential safety net for the future of DL?
Thank you for your intervention. I have to say that whilst the government is minded to nationalise British Steel, we don't have any other nationalisations in mind. However, I will say we do recognise the importance of the plate mill at DL, and I am concerned to ensure that it gets back up and running and delivers those steel ship plate orders. And I'd like to thank her for the work that she's been doing championing that. I'd also like to thank, who was sat behind me, the member for Penderson and Stocksbridge, who has supported me throughout the preparation of this legislation, but can't speak because of her position in the House. And likewise, the member for Scunthorpe, who also supported the passage of this bill, but again can't speak because of his position in the House. And the Chief Whip, of course, who did so much work in advance of this bill coming here as well. But first, let me give at least 1 or 2 minutes to the amendment that was proposed. Now, fundamentally, there is a contradiction in the position of the opposition, in that if without passing this bill, then British Steel itself is trapped in this position of the Steel Industry Special Measures Act, which they were supportive of, and so they don't want to allow British Steel to break out of that. But I would point out to them, and certainly the members opposite who feel that the bill takes too many powers to the Secretary of State, the bill has been modelled on the Banking Act. And at the time, when the Banking Act was passed, there was a fellow sat over there called George Osborne. I understand he's popular in Tory circles. And he said, I will do everything I can to help this bill onto the statute. And I think what we're hearing is, it's good enough for the bankers, but it's not good enough for the steel workers. So, we move on. In terms of private sector investment, I am as concerned as the Shadow Secretary of State and of course, the spokesperson from the Liberal Democrats is to get in private sector investment. We have carried out a very careful balance with this bill to ensure that the steel industry is fully informed, understands our intentions and is supportive, and they are supportive. And that's why we heard recently, just in the last couple of weeks, Seven Steel announcing a 100 million private sector investment in the steel industry in the UK. So there is no chilling effect on this. In fact, this will be a spur for private sector investment. It will be a boost to private sector investment. Let me just mention some of the contributions that we've had. The chair of the Select Committee, he mentioned a number of things, but he was the only person, I think, to raise scrap. We've launched a scrap working group, which will be dealing with that issue. The member for Newport East rightly raised the importance of the Llanwern steel plant. It is incredibly important, and of course, she mentioned as well import penetration on rebar. My near neighbour, the member for Middlesbrough and Thornaby East, the member for Hartlepool, of course, as well, the member for Middlesbrough South and East Cleveland, could not have been clearer in the way that the Tories abandoned the steel communities in Teesside and the difference that this Labour government is making. And a number of the members opposite mentioned tariffs. There are no tariffs in this bill. But as you heard from the Trade Minister this morning when he was stood at the dispatch box and the Secretary of State this afternoon, then there is an open door for companies to come in and discuss those issues. And then finally, the member for Boston and Skegness, he and I have had many exchanges around steel. and sometimes we've agreed and sometimes we haven't agreed, but we always have a good discussion. And he raised the importance of DRI, blast furnaces and electric arc furnaces, and we will certainly have the opportunity, I think, for him and me to discuss that much further. Look, I think it's quite clear the British government is not and should not be neutral when it comes to British business. We're on the side of business. We're unashamedly on the side of British business. We're unashamedly on the side of the steel industry and steel communities. That's the difference between us and them. I commend this bill to the House.
Order. The original question was that the bill be now read a second time, since when an amendment has been proposed as on the order paper. The question is that the amendment be made. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Contrary, no. No. Clear the lobby. The question is that the amendment be made. As many as of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. No. The tellers for the ayes are Lincoln Jop and Alicia Cairns. The tellers for the noes, Sean Davies and Nick Dakin. Sir.
The ayes to the right, 68. The noes to the left, 242.
The ayes to the right were 68. The noes to the left, 242. So the noes have it. The noes have it. Unlock. The question is that the bill be now read a second time. As many as of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Programme motion to be moved formally.
Formally.
The question is, as on the order paper, as many as of that opinion say aye.
Aye.
Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Money motion to be moved formally.
I beg to move.
The question is, as on the order paper, as many as are of that opinion say aye.
Aye.
Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Ways and means motion to be moved formally.
I beg to move.
The question is, as on the order paper, as many as of that opinion say aye.
Aye.
Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Motion number 5 on local government. Minister to move.
I beg to move.
The question is, as on the order paper, as many as are of that opinion say aye.
Aye.
Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it.
I beg to move that this House do now adjourn.
The question is that this House do now adjourn. Tony Vaughan.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Just over 500 days ago, Lindsay and Craig Foreman, my constituent's mother and stepfather, were on a trip of a lifetime, a motorcycle journey across the world. During their travels, Lindsay, who is a positive psychologist and life coach, planned to study, as part of that research, the elements of what makes a good life along the way. She wanted to ask people in all the different countries that they travelled through what happiness, fulfilment and purpose meant to them. In January 2025, they had entered Iran with visas and with an approved tour company. But by speaking to people simply about what makes a good life, the Iranian authorities claimed that the Foremans were conducting espionage and attempting to overthrow the Iranian regime, a totally baseless and utterly absurd allegation. The obvious truth, Madam Deputy Speaker, was that they were innocent tourists. The Foremans were arrested in Iran in January 2025 and were later convicted of espionage in a trial that fell well short of international standards. In February this year, they were sentenced to 10 years in prison. Their case was heard by the notorious Revolutionary Court by an Iranian judge who has himself been sanctioned by the UK, the US and the EU. That judge relied on so-called confessions of Lindsay and Craig, including as a result of Lindsay being forced to sign documents in Farsi without interpretation and to fingerprint blank pieces of paper. Those documents were obtained after subjecting them to severe psychological pressure and inhuman treatment. That included solitary confinement for 56 days without justification, and while in solitary, Lindsay was interrogated for 30 consecutive days and Craig for 14. They were blindfolded to, from and during those interrogations. Craig was walked into walls deliberately. Aggressive questioning was used with language designed to cause maximum psychological distress. And for all of these interrogations, Craig and Lindsay had no legal representation at all, despite repeatedly requesting a lawyer. There were countless other due process violations, not seeing evidence, false evidence, not having the opportunity to challenge evidence, being taken into court without any warning. And UK officials, Madam Deputy Speaker, were not even permitted to attend this so-called trial. Since August and October last year, Craig and Lindsay, respectively, have been held in Evin Prison in Tehran, which is widely regarded as one of the most notorious prisons in Iran, in extremely harsh conditions. I would like to put on record my sincere thanks on behalf of my constituent Joe Bennett, who sits bravely in the public gallery above, and the whole of the Foreman family for the welfare support given by the FCDO, given by the Minister and by the Foreign Secretary to Lindsay and Craig and their family. And I thank them for everything that they are doing in very difficult diplomatic circumstances. I also welcome the government's acceptance that the Formans are simply innocent tourists whose conviction and sentence are unjustifiable and appalling. But Craig and Lindsay's family would like the British government to go further and to act with more urgency.
On that point?
Yes, I will take an intervention.
Sullivan. I'm grateful for the Honourable Member for giving way and for the powerful speech that he's making on behalf of his constituents. On the point of monitoring their welfare and their health, with diplomatic relations as they are at the moment, can we also implore upon the Minister about all channels and actions that can be done to check on their welfare?
Tony Vaughan.
I thank my honourable friend for her intervention. She gets ahead of where I'm actually makes an incredibly important point. And it arises from the fact that Craig and Lindsay are currently undertaking a hunger strike, which is essentially the only way that they feel they are able to protest their treatment, which was after their phone cards and their contact with their family were withdrawn. So it is a very important point, which I will come on to make, which is that the government really need to explain what measures they're taking to monitor their health in these very difficult circumstances, if necessary, using third-party allies. But ultimately, I wanted to set out 4 things that the family are calling for, on which I would be grateful for the Minister's views. The first of those is that the British government should say loudly and clearly that Lindsay and Craig are not spies and that their detention is politically motivated and is arbitrary in international law. Now, I say this because this case follows a well-documented line of cases where Iran has taken innocent British citizens and those of other nations as bargaining chips for their own purposes. If the government accepts that Lindsay and Craig are innocent and are not spies, and that the trial they were subjected to in Iran was grossly unfair and provides no basis at all for their detentions, the government must have a view about why the Iranians are doing this. Now, my constituent Joe does not believe it is in Craig and Lindsay's interest to shy away from calling a spade here. These are quite obviously trumped-up false charges from a kangaroo court which Iran is pursuing for its own ends. In other words, Craig and Lindsay Foreman are hostages. They are being held for political purposes, and we should be prepared to say so openly and to calibrate our response accordingly. I will.
I thank the honourable gentleman for giving way on that point. He is making absolutely the right points. So far, the government has limited itself to saying that they were innocent tourists, but they have not said categorically, despite promising, that they are not spies. They have also refused to say they are arbitrarily detained. We are dealing with a terrorist state, so does the honourable gentleman agree that there is no reason for the government to hold back in its rhetoric? This is a terrorist state with a record of holding people hostage for political leverage. If we're not willing to use it in this situation, then when would we ever use it when it comes to allies or those who purport to be our friends when they hold British citizens hostage?
I thank my honourable friend for her intervention. She is right that we need to call a spade here. There is no basis for these convictions, no basis for this detention, and that is the hallmark of an arbitrary detention in international law. And if we can accept that, we can then move to the next stage to take the measures that are appropriate to deal with the very serious abuse of British citizens in Iran. A number of our international partners have not shied away from such clear language. For example, France and Australia have explicitly rejected the espionage convictions of their nationals in Iran in similar situations as baseless and as politically motivated. They have described those detentions of their nationals as arbitrary detention and have used language not to close down such language, not to close down diplomacy, but to strengthen it. And so my constituent Joe and his family do ask that why should the British government be more cautious about the truth than others have been in similar situations? Secondly, Madam Deputy Speaker, I would ask the Minister what consideration has been given to providing diplomatic protection to Lindsay and Craig Foreman. This is an established way of converting an individual grievance into an interstate dispute. Craig and Lindsay are our citizens. They are, and so the government must do all it can to protect them, and that should include, at the very least, a serious and transparent assessment of whether conferring diplomatic protection on them would enhance our ability to bring them home, and if not, why not? Third, what consideration has been given to how the International Court of Justice mechanism and other international legal fora could be used by the UK to exert pressure on Iran? The ICJ is where the UK could argue that politically motivated arbitrary detentions of our nationals does breach international legal obligations, and France has done exactly that with its nationals. So I would ask the Minister, what is the government's view about that mechanism in the Foreman's case? And does the Minister accept, in principle, that the pattern of conduct here is not just unjustifiable, but arbitrary and unlawful under international law? And fourth, and this is the point made by my honourable friend from Gravesham, that given Craig is in his 13th day of his hunger strike and Lindsay is on her 4th, can the Minister assure the family that appropriate steps are being taken to monitor the foreman's health in prison, and if necessary, with the assistance of an ally? I will.
Louise Davis.
I congratulate the honourable gentleman on securing this debate and thank him for the cross-party nature and his approach, and thank the all-party Parliament group for their work on this concerning case of Craig and Lindsay Foreman. And this is an absolutely crucial moment for the UK government and us in this chamber to ascertain whether the support is satisfactory to Craig and Lindsay. And I say this as those tourists, Craig and Lindsay, are formerly my constituents, and recognise that Joe and the family are living under deeply challenging times, and they want to know that that welfare and protection is roundly being given.
I thank my honourable friend for her intervention. She is absolutely right, and it is the cross-party support, not just in this chamber, but in response to an EDM which I tabled some months ago, and I think there were around 70 parliamentarians who signed, which is a good number, given that many people don't actually sign those documents. But I think it shows that there is cross-party support for more robust action in the case of the Foremans, and that is what I will continue with my colleagues in this chamber and outside to do. Madam Deputy Speaker, over 500 days into this terrible nightmare, Lindsay and Craig and my constituent Joe Bennett and their family are desperately in need of hope. They see the French bring home their nationals from Iran, as Australia did, and as the UK eventually did in the case of Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe and Anusha Ashori. And I thank Richard Ratcliffe too, who is here in the public gallery, who has been a source of great support to the family at this very difficult time, in spite of his own and Nazanin's terrible ordeal which they had experienced. France and Australia have explicitly rejected espionage convictions as baseless and politically motivated, and so Joe wants to understand why the UK can't take a similar approach in relation to his parents. And so in closing, the family are not asking, Madam Deputy Speaker, for miracles. They're asking for clarity of language and the maximum use of the legal and diplomatic tools available to our country, and for an approach which treats Craig and Lindsay appropriately, which is that they are innocent British citizens who have been taken from their lives and from their families, and who must urgently be brought home.
Yeah. Minister, Hamish Faulkner.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm grateful to my honourable friend, the member for Folkestone and Hythe, both for securing this debate and for his support for Craig, Lindsay and their family, and I acknowledge the presence of the family here today. I join with my honourable friend in recognising their remarkable determination. They've shown great courage in truly difficult circumstances. This is a truly terrible case. My thoughts are with the couple and their family at this incredibly difficult time. The Foreign Secretary and I are doing all we can to support them and to press for Craig and Lindsay's release. I'm grateful for the thoughtful contributions of all members on both sides of the House and do my best to respond to the points that have been raised. The couple have been detained in Iran since January, and they're being held in Evin prison in Tehran. Recent developments have only added to the family's distress. I spoke both with Joe, who's with us today, and Warren, Craig's brother, on Monday. They told me that telephone contacts between the couple and their family ceased almost 2 weeks ago, and that there are serious concerns for their health now that they have both begun a hunger strike. The honourable member asks me if I can provide assurance that they are having adequate health monitoring. I cannot provide that assurance. The consular officials have not had access to the couple in some time, but we continue to press for that assurance and for access very regularly. And I was discussing this with our ambassador to Iran just earlier today. I will.
I thank the Minister for saying that he is pressing on this and that he's been talking to our ambassador, but can he tell the House when he last spoke to his Iranian counterpart and how many times he's raised it in the last 3 months with his Iranian counterpart? Because with all due respect, this needs government-to-government negotiation for us to get them home.
Mr Faulkner.
I raised it with the Iranian ambassador very recently whenever I last saw him, and I've raised it in every single interaction I have had with him. But I'd just like to reassure the Honourable Lady, as she knows, that our ambassador to Tehran is a fully empowered representative of the British government and talks to the Iranian MFA on the consular issues on a very regular basis to ensure that they are raised. This case has been raised at every single level, not just by me, but by the Foreign Secretary with the Iranian Foreign Minister within the last fortnight. So there is no doubt in the Iranian government's mind how seriously we take this. Supporting British nationals overseas is, of course, a fundamental part of what we do, and we have been seeking to support Craig, Lindsay and their family throughout. I think my meeting on Monday was my 7th with the Foreman family, and the Foreign Secretary has met with them twice. We will continue to provide consular assistance, and officials remain in close and very regular contact with Warren and Joe, ensuring that the family are kept informed and supported. We want to ensure their concerns are understood and reflected in our approach. As I said to both Joe and Warren earlier this week, I remain available to speak with them at any time. As I just said, we have repeatedly and consistently raised Craig and Lindsay's case with the Iranian authorities at every appropriate level.
Will the Minister give way?
I will.
Can I thank the Minister for giving way? This House has heard, sadly, the comments as he's made about the government pressing about these cases. But he will know that it was pressure from this House and the families that has caused the release of the other hostages in Iran. So could he undertake, as my honourable friend suggested, to contact his counterpart at the end of this debate and ensure that the family get proper access to Craig and Lindsay Foreman, and we will repeat their names in this House until they are released?
Faulkner.
Member Speaker, as I just said, we have and we will continue to raise this as regularly as possible with the Iranian authorities, both on some of the consular grounds that have been discussed, but also the wider elements of the case. I would just say, as the House knows, I cover many very difficult consular cases, and we've discussed others in this chamber. It is not always public pressure that is most effective in securing releases. We have seen a range of releases across my wider area of responsibility during my time as Minister. Those releases are affected in a variety of ways. So I will always give families my best advice, and indeed their constituency MPs when they're authorised to speak on their behalf. I will when I finish. I will always give my best advice, Madam Deputy Speaker. It will not always be that public pressure is the best way to secure releases. I regret to say that the Iranian authorities appear to use detentions as a way to try and secure public as well as private leverage, and it is not always my advice that people should go public in response. I will give way.
I thank the Minister, who's been very generous. Could the Minister take the opportunity to confirm on the floor of this House, to the point he's just made, that Craig and Lindsay Foreman are not spies, and have that confirmed on the floor of this House?
I've said before, they are innocent tourists, and we stand by that position. I see from my notes that, in fact, the last time, just to respond to the Honourable Lady's point, that the Foreign Secretary raised this case was with the Iranian Foreign Minister on the 8th of May. So just to reassure her that ministers are raising this very regularly at the highest level, despite the press of other business. As well as at a ministerial level, officials will continue to work intensively, raising the case at every opportunity with their Iranian counterparts. And while it is true that our embassy in Tehran remains temporarily closed because of the situation, it continues to operate remotely. So I'd like to reassure the House that we continue to raise this despite that temporary closure. As I said earlier, our ambassador has pressed the Iranian authorities to restore telephone contact with the family, to allow Craig and Lindsay to see one another, and to ensure access to appropriate medical care and essential welfare items. As I know my honourable friends will recognise, and as we've discussed privately before, cases of this nature are complex and highly sensitive. When British nationals are detained overseas, they are of course subject to the legal system of the country in which they are held. However, we consistently advocate for fair treatment, due process and respect for the international obligations set out in the UN minimum standards, often known as the Mandela Rules. As I've alluded to, in Iran, engagement must be handled with particular care. We are balancing private engagement and public channels to ensure that we do not inadvertently make the situation more difficult for Craig and Lindsay. These cases rarely move, I will once I've made a little bit more progress. These cases rarely move quickly or predictably. Progress is often incremental and requires sustained and patient engagement. And I want to assure the House that we are persistent and determined in our efforts.
Would the Minister give way on the complexity of these cases?
I think I've probably got to take turns, so I will to the Honourable Lady and then to the Honourable Gentleman.
Bless you. I thank the Minister. He's made the point about public versus private and what works. The French approach to declaring their person arbitrarily detained worked. They are home. So will the Minister, to my honourable friend's point, at least declare on the floor of the House today, given that he's just recognised that Iranian law is not fair trial, we cannot recognise due process here, that they are at least being arbitrarily detained?
Minister.
I'll try to make a little progress and then I will take my honourable friends. I am always reluctant from the dispatch box to compare our diplomacy with that of our friends and partners and allies. But I would say gently to the Honourable Lady that in the French case, which I think she's referring to, there was 4 years of detention in conditions which no one would want to see Craig and Lindsay in. So I understand the point that she's making, but the comparisons between different cases are not easily made, and we've got to give our best judgment and best advice to the families. And I recognise that the family have called for stronger public action, including a range of steps, some of which were outlined very clearly by our honourable friends. As I've tried to make clear throughout my intervention, we will give the family our best advice, and it falls to us to give our best judgment as well about what is in Craig and Lindsay's interest. That is at the heart of our approach, and I will give way on that point.
I'm grateful for the Minister for giving way. Would the Minister agree that it's precisely because of the complexity of these cases, potentially involving numerous different government departments, that we really do need an envoy for complex consular cases who has not just the resources but the authority to bring together government and act proactively to get these cases moving? And on that point, would he be able to give the House an update as to where that is at, and also whether or not there is going to be the framework and the powers to actually bring these sorts of cases forward? Because there are matters which the Minister is aware of that potentially concern other government departments in this particular case, which it seems to me may well be helped by an individual who has the authority, the resources and the powers to bring these sorts of cases forward. I wonder what his thoughts were on that.
I can confirm to my honourable friend and to the House that we are progressing the appointment of an envoy. One of the issues we have sought to navigate in the appointment of an envoy is I recognise, the government recognises my responsibilities and that of the Foreign Secretary to this House and to other members of it who will wish to represent their constituents appropriately in public in the way that we are doing as we speak. So there is a balance to be struck between appointing an envoy with all of the ability to do the things that my honourable friend describes, while also not taking away from parliamentary accountability, which is of course a central pillar of our system. So we are bringing forward that appointment, and I look forward to returning to the House to provide further details about it, and indeed the individual that I hope will take up that post. I recognise that over the course of even this short exchange, there are differing views about the most effective ways to secure progress, Madam Deputy Speaker. That is entirely understandable given the circumstances. But I wish to reassure my honourable friends, the family and the gallery, that every decision that we take is guided by what we judge to be in Craig and Lindsay's best interests. Our objective is clear: to work towards their return to their loved ones, and until then, to ensure improvements in their welfare. Let me conclude. I remain deeply concerned for Craig and Lindsay Foreman, particularly in light of recent developments affecting their health. We are working, and we will continue to work intensively through all appropriate channels to support Craig and Lindsay, improve their conditions, and pursue their swift release.
The question is that this House do now adjourn. As many are of that opinion, say aye. Aye. The ayes have it. Order, order.